Really positive news announced today that we've got 2 sites in Nottinghamshire into the final 15 nationally bidding for to host a new STEP fusion energy power plant. Really important for the future. Hundreds of millions of pounds of investment and job creation in Nottinghamshire if one of those sites, one in Bassett Law, one in Rushcliffe, is selected, as well as a carbon neutral energy source for the future. Incredible opportunities in terms of skills and research, and the Nottinghamshire being at the forefront of all of that research and investment. So great news. Hopefully we can go further. Final announcements in terms of choosing a place, probably this time next year.
Okay, good morning everybody and welcome along to this morning's planning committee for Nottinghamshire County Council. I'm Richard Butler, I'm the chairman of the committee, and with me today are fellow councillors, my vice chairman councillor Sybil Fielding, councillors Andre Camilleri, Robert Corden, Jim Creamer, Paul Henshaw, Andy Meakin, Nigel Moxon, John Ogle, Philip Owen, Tracy Taylor, Roger Upton and David Williamson. There will be a lot of discussion today. Could I ask officers who are going to be addressing the committee to introduce yourselves, your names, and just to explain to colleagues and visitors who you are, please?
Good morning. My name is Jonathan Smith. I'm the team manager of the development management team.
Hi, my name is Mike Hankin. I'm the planning application senior practitioner. I am the case officer of this planning application. I will be presenting the case with support from my manager, Jonathan Smith. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Sally Gill, Group Manager Planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I should mention as well that the meeting, as well as being held here, is also being broadcast on YouTube and is being recorded for future viewing, should anyone wish to view it. So we'll go on to the agenda, and item 1 is to note the appointment by full council on the 27th of May of myself as the chairman and Councillor Fielding as the vice chairman of the committee for the 2021-22 municipal year. This is for noting. Are we all happy to note that? Thank you. And then item 2 is the terms of reference and committee membership. And I need to ask you to note the terms of reference of membership of the committee. This is basically what the committee is and how it works. So are we all happy to note that? Thank you. So item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting, which was held way back on the 5th of January. That's a long time ago. We're making up for it now, though, because there's a lot of meetings coming up. But we do need to just note and agree the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 5th of January. Now, of course, most of us weren't at that meeting, but councillors Creamer, Fielding and Henshaw were. So are you, councillors, happy that the minutes are accurate and correct?
Chair, sorry to interrupt, Chair. It's Rachel Clack,
Yes,
the legal advisor to this committee. I just noticed a small typo in the minutes in the list of officers and attendants. It lists Sally Gill, Group Manager of Planning, as in the Chief Executive's department. So if Sally could be put in her rightful place in the Place department, just that small amendment. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Group Manager in the Place, Group Manager Planning in the Place.
Well, we'll move you back accordingly into your right place. We can't have you listed as the wrong title and position. So with that alteration, we'll approve those minutes. So thank you. Right, so item 6 is, sorry, I beg your pardon, no, item 5 is declarations of interest. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Item 4, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Well spotted.
Councillor Taylor's replacing Councillor Smith for this meeting only. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And now we have item 5, which is declarations of interest. Do any members or officers present have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? And or do any members or officers present have any private interests, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? I assume not, but one must never assume no. Okay, thank you. And item 6 is declarations of lobbying. Do any members present have any instances of lobbying to declare? I think, and I stand to be corrected, but I know I have received emails and correspondence from individuals and groups such as the Nottingham Friends of the Earth, Extinction Rebellion, Stop Ratcliffe Incineration Campaign, and other individuals. So I have received those as emails. Does anyone else wish to? Councillor Fielding.
Thank you, Chair. I had a Mr. Porter phone me up last night, of which I did assure him that having read the papers, I would listen to all concerned and with an open mind take a decision at the end.
Okay, thank you. Have we got that? Was a Mr. Did you say Mr. Porter? Councillor Creamer.
Yes. So declare the same various emails and various objection groups as the chairman.
Councillor Upton.
Well, likewise, I've had similar emails to what you related to, Chairman. But,
okay, thank you. Councillor Owen.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've had similar emails, and there was one that came through later on last night from a Councillor Edwards of the City Council telling us how we should be doing things.
Actually, you reminded me, I also received that email, but I did mention that I'd had other individual emails as well, so thank you for that. Councillor Williamson.
Just to clear, both myself and Councillor Meakin have also received those same variety of emails.
Okay, thank you. So that's Councillor Williamson,
Chair.
Councillor Meakin,
Chair.
Councillor Henshaw.
I presume that I've been similarly contacted, but as I only drove back from Cornwall last night at 11 o'clock at night, I've not really looked at all my emails, so I presume I've had the lobbying, but I've not actually read any of it at the moment.
I would think it's quite probable. But,
okay, thank you. I'm just trying to look now.
I understand your situation. Councillor Moxon.
Yeah, I've had the exact same emails, and I almost feel a bit disappointed that nobody's rang me though. So I've had all the emails.
Thank you, and Councillor Corden.
Yeah, I've also received the emails as well.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Camilleri.
Yes, I've also received the same emails.
And Councillor Ogle.
I've received some emails, Chairman.
I assumed as much, but didn't like to. Well, I shouldn't assume again, should I? And oh, sorry, Mr. Smith.
Just to confirm, Chair, there will be quite a lengthy part of the presentation. We'll be dealing with the late representations that have been received over the past few days. So we'll go through those one by one later on.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So that's to assure people, residents and others who have contacted us that we will be responding to the comments and representations that have been made. So they have been received and they will be spoken about later.
Councillor, Chair, if I could just make one further point. I am aware that Rushcliffe Labour Group had canvassed against this particular application at the recent local elections, and so I'd be grateful. Obviously, this is an apolitical committee, of course, and just like a confirmation from the Labour members of this committee that they will be approaching their decision making in an open and impartial manner.
Thank you. That's an important point. Councillor Fielding.
Certainly confirmed that that's what.
Thank you. And Councillor Creamer.
Yes, we'll be doing it as per the planning rules, as per individuals, etc. But I do find it rather insulting that we're actually singled out in that respect, because there must be members of other groups, other places, the same thing. So I do find it insulting that our integrity has not actually been trusted.
Well, apologies, Councillor Creamer, there was absolutely no question of your integrity whatsoever. It's simply a procedural point, just to make sure. My concern is to ensure that the decisions of this committee are robust and as far as possible. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry you feel insulted, Councillor Creamer, but it is a procedural thing. Councillor Henshaw.
I never feel insulted, Chair, and at the end of the day, if the officer's got to ask, then that's no problem to me. I can honestly say I've never been contacted by any member of any Labour group in relation to this issue. And as being a member of planning for many, many years, I understand totally that we're an apolitical decision-making body.
Thank you, Councillor Henshaw. That's very helpful. And I will remind colleagues that although in other committees and places we are political with a big P beasts, if you like, or not necessarily beasts, on planning and rights of way, it is strictly non-political in terms of decision making. And that's a very important thing that I think we have to remind all ourselves of on occasions. Right, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the main reason we're here today, and let's discuss a planning application from Emerge. This is the energy from waste facility at Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station, and I'd like to invite Mr. Hankin to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're just getting the presentation running. Yep. Okay. Morning, councillors. Yeah, this is a planning application for the development of the East Midlands Energy Regeneration Centre, a multi-fuel energy recovery facility at the Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station site, submitted by Uniper Limited. The Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station site occupies around 453 Remembrance Way. The development site for the proposed Emerge facility is located on the northern power station site, adjacent to the existing power station buildings, and is identified in bold on the plan. The site extends to around 4 hectares in area. The village of Thrumpton Soar village is approximately 1.75 kilometres southwest of the application site on the opposite side of the A453. The development site outlined in yellow on the aerial photo incorporates a tarmac and compacted stone surfaced area of land which has historically been used as a car park for power station contractors as well as a machinery laydown area. The site is bounded to the north and east by electrified power station perimeter security fencing, and the power station buildings are sited immediately to the southwest. In terms of the development sought planning permission, planning permission is sought for the development of a multi-fuel energy recovery facility. The facility would utilise non-hazardous residual waste originating from both commercial, industrial and local authority waste collections. The facility has a design operational capacity of 472,100 tonnes of waste per year, but this could rise to 524,550 tonnes of waste per year if the calorific value of the incoming waste stream was lower than anticipated. The energy recovery facility would incinerate the waste, with the heat being used to power steam turbines and generate 49.9 megawatts of electricity, of which 43.4 megawatts of electricity would be exported to the grid. That is sufficient to meet the average annual domestic demand of about 90,000 houses. The remaining 6.5 megawatts of electricity would be used to power the facility itself. In comparative terms, the coal-fired power station has a generating capacity of 2,000 megawatts, or 40 times that of the proposed Emerge facility. The main building of the Emerge Centre would be 178 metres long and typically 73 metres in width, with a maximum height of 49.4 metres. 2 flue stacks, each one being 2.25 metres in diameter and constructed side by side, would extend to a height of 110 metres. The existing concrete stack of the coal-fired power station is 199 metres high, and the gas turbine generating facility located next to the development site is 95 metres in height. The main building would be subdivided into various process areas running north to south, incorporating a waste reception area, waste bunker hall, main boiler area, turbine hall, flue gas treatment and emissions stack. The development also incorporates various ancillary buildings and structures, including admin offices, workshop building, external tanks and containers, electricity connection compound, combined heat and power buildings, roads, car parking, gatehouse, weighbridge complex, substation, and new areas of soft and hard landscaping. As part of the development project and to satisfy Greenbelt policy, the two southernmost cooling towers seen on the left of the photo would be demolished, with these works likely to be undertaken as permitted development. The facility would take about 3 years to build, with a capital investment of around 330 million and employ 600 construction workers at the peak period. Once operational, the facility would create 45 new permanent full-time jobs. 43 parking spaces would be provided for staff, in addition to 10 sheltered bicycle parking spaces. Vehicle access for both construction and operational traffic would be from the existing grade-separated roundabout junction below the A453 Remembrance Way on the south-eastern end of the power station site. This provides access to an existing access into the power station site already used by HGVs. The operation of the merged facility would generate an average of 309 HGV trips. That's 618 movements, 309 in, 309 out each day. Most of the HGV movements would occur during weekdays between 7 in the morning and 5 at night. About 97% of the overall deliveries, although planning permission is sought for 24-hour days, 7-day-a-week access for deliveries to the facility. In response to concerns raised in the consultation process, a lorry routing agreement is proposed to ensure lorries only travel along the A453 to access the site and do not travel along any of the roads which join the A453 between the Silverdale Island, where the 453 joins the A52, and junction 24 of the M1. The power station site includes its own railway sidings, which connect into the East Midlands main line. These facilities will be retained and offer the potential for rail deliveries to occur in the future in the event that operational contracts are secured. I will now summarise the consultation responses received in connection with the plan application. The Council has undertaken extensive consultation and publicity in connection with the plan application. The consultation responses we've received, we've had no objections from the adjoining local authorities, including Rushcliffe, Broxtowe, Erewash and North West Leicestershire Borough and District Councils and Derbyshire County Council. There's also been no objections raised from various technical consultations, including the Public Health England, Notts County Council Public Health, the Environment Agency, Canal and River Trust, Notts County Council's Flood Risk Team, Highways England, Notts County Council Highways, Natural England, Notts County Council Nature Conservation, Notts County Council Planning Policy, Network Rail, via Rights Away, via Landscape, via Noise, HS2 Limited, Notts County Council Built Heritage, Notts County Council Archaeology, Nottingham East Midlands Airport and the Civil Aviation Authority. Concerns and objections have been raised by many of the local parish councils, including Ratcliffe-on-Soar, Kingston-on-Soar, Eastleek, Gotham, Barton-in-Fabis Parish Council, Sutton-Bonington and Sutton-Bonington Parish Council. The primary area of concern raised by the parishes relates to traffic impacts and the environmental effects of the development, including odour, noise and waste management. Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust objects to the plan application on the basis that they consider inadequate ecological surveys have been carried out, and also because of the potential effects of noise, light and air quality on habitats and species within and adjoining the site. In terms of the publicity of the plan application, objections have been received from a number of environmental pressure groups, including United Kingdom Without Incineration, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Extinction Rebellion Beyond Politics Group, Nottingham Green Party, Nottingham Friends of the Earth, Derbyshire and South Derbyshire Friends of the Earth. We've also received 26 letters of objection from the local community. The main concerns we've received are set out on the slide in front of you. They relate to the need for the incinerator, the amount of waste treated by the facility and where it will be sourced from, impacts relating to the levels of waste recycling and the sustainability of the development, climate change concerns and compliance with net zero by 2050, use of alternative waste treatment techniques, traffic, pollution, health impacts, development in the Greenbelt, visual impacts, odour and ecological issues. The council has received 16 letters of support. Again, they're set out on the slide. They identify that the development will provide jobs and support the local economy, support the redevelopment of the power station, support the use of non-recyclable waste to generate electricity, reduce landfill of waste, reductions in carbon dioxide emissions and reductions in visual impact from the existing power station. My colleague Jonathan Smith will discuss the late representations a little bit later in this presentation. In terms of the main planning issues raised by the plan application, the determination of this plan application is complex and has generated significant public interest. It's your first committee. They're not all like this, honestly. In appraising the plan application, officers have carefully examined the planning submission and its supporting environmental statement and have taken account of the representations and comments from consultees and members of the public. The council is required to determine the plan application in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. These matters are set out in detail within the committee report, and I will seek to summarise the main conclusions reached within this presentation. In terms of compliance with waste management policy, national waste management policy and the waste course strategy policy WCS3 seek to encourage and promote the delivery of sustainable waste management underpinned through the application of the waste hierarchy. The table there sets out the waste hierarchy. This is sorry, just go back one. Yeah, sorry. This facility is a recovery facility. You will see it second from bottom in the waste hierarchy. The emerged facility will process residual waste. In terms of what residual waste is, it is mixed waste that cannot be usefully reused or recycled. Residual waste may contain materials that could theoretically be recycled if they were perfectly separated and clean, but are currently too contaminated for recycling to be economically or practically feasible. That's the definition from the government, well, the DEFRA guide, Energy from Waste Guide. That's government advice policy. Waste policy seeks to minimise the use of landfill for residual waste disposal, and government policy supports the use of energy recovery for the management of residual waste in preference to landfill. The government sees a long-term role for energy from waste, which it generally views as a recovery activity in the context of the waste hierarchy. In terms of the need of the emerged facility and the quantity of residual waste requiring treatment in Nottinghamshire and the surrounding area, the key policy for considering this issue is Waste Course Strategy Policy WCS3. The policy seeks to ensure that new waste management facilities promote the movement of waste up the waste hierarchy and assist in increasing the level of recycling and composting of waste, setting a target of 70% for recycling and composting, alongside the development of new energy recovery facilities to manage about 20% of the waste stream, whilst giving lowest priority to landfill to reduce disposal inputs to 10% or less. Using these assumptions of 70% recycling, 20% energy recovery, 10% disposal, the waste core strategy identifies that there is likely to be a 294,000 tonnes per annum shortfall in residual waste capacity in 2025. However, current levels of recycling are not meeting this 70% target, with municipal waste recycling across the county currently sitting at 43.2% in Nottinghamshire and 26.5% in Nottingham City. The table on the projector shows that there is little upward trend in these recycling levels in recent years to give confidence that the 70% recycling target set within the waste core strategy for municipal waste will be reached in 2025. DEFRA data indicates that 52% of commercial and industrial waste is currently being recycled. The waste core strategy acknowledges that the 70% recycling target is ambitious and acknowledges that there may need to be some flexibility in terms of the type of waste management facilities provided if this target is not reached, to ensure that there is not a waste management capacity shortfall. Because the 70% recycling target is not being achieved, the 294,000 tonnes per annum recovery capacity shortfall identified in the waste core strategy is likely to be larger. The report gives detailed consideration to the quantity of local authority collected waste, commercial industrial waste and other waste streams produced in the Nottinghamshire and Nottingham area, and the effect that different recycling levels will have on the quantity of residual waste requiring treatment in the area in future years. The model concludes that the shortfall in residual waste processing capacity in Nottinghamshire and Nottingham is more likely to be in a range of between 294,000 tonnes per annum and 562,526 tonnes per annum, depending on the levels of recycling you take. The design capacity of the merged facility at 472,100 tonnes falls within the various modelled ranges of the processing capacity shortfall. But there are clearly some modelling scenarios with lower shortfalls where the capacity of the merged facility exceeds Nottinghamshire and Nottingham's level of need. If the emerged facility were to operate in a lower shortfall scenario, it would import waste from outside the county in order to operate at its design capacity. The aim of the waste core strategy, as identified in Strategic Objective 6, is to ensure that there is sufficient waste management capacity to treat at least the equivalent waste that produced in Nottinghamshire and Nottingham. It is important, however, that that aim of Strategic Objective 6 in matching management capacity to the level waste horizons is not overinterpreted to conclude that waste management facilities will only be permitted in Nottinghamshire and Nottingham, which process waste originating from the area. Wider market influences within the waste industry ultimately determine where waste is actually processed, and this does not necessarily result in waste being processed within the same administration area to where it is produced. The location of the emerged facility in the south of the county, close to the county boundaries of Derbyshire and Leicestershire, means that there are going to be residual waste horizons outside the county which are closer to the facility than waste horizons in Nottinghamshire, in particular those originating from the north of the county. Similarly, residual waste horizons originating from the north of the county are currently transported to energy recovery facilities in Sheffield and Ferrybridge near Wakefield. Waste Course Strategy Policy 12 sets out the planning policy in relation to managing waste which originates from outside of Nottinghamshire and Nottingham, confirming that this will be permitted if it meets one of 3 policy criteria as shown on the slide. The emerged facility would assist in reducing the UK's current dependence on landfill disposal by providing additional recovery and thus reducing the county's current reliance on the export of residual treatment. If I can it's just worth taking a minute to look at that chart. What that chart there is showing is in black the amount of waste in the UK sent to landfill. The most recent data is 2019. The blue is the amount of energy recovery. And then the dotted line at the bottom is what we export out of the UK for treatment abroad. You'll see in 2018, that was roughly the point where the amount of waste disposal to landfill and energy recovery were equivalent. Effectively, we're putting very much the same as a country into landfill as what we are into energy recovery. In terms of the consideration of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change effects, national and local planning policies seek to support the transition to a low carbon future and promote renewable and low carbon energy generation. Nottinghamshire County Council recognises the importance of mitigating against climate change and taking action to move towards carbon neutrality, as reflected through the declaration of a climate change emergency at the Council's annual general meeting on the 27th of May this year. The plan application is supported by detailed calculations of the level of carbon emissions from the operation of the emerged facility, which show that the processing of 472,100 tonnes of waste per year, residual waste, within the emerge would release a net equivalent of 453,184 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. However, the residual waste stream incorporates around 60% of biogenic waste, such as food waste, paper, garden waste, waste wood, which are classed as climate change neutral for the purposes of assessing climate change impacts. The level of non-biogenic fossil CO2 emissions, emissions as known, from the emerged facility and its ancillary functions generated by the remaining 40% of the waste is calculated to be 191,223. This clearly is a high level of greenhouse gas emissions that would have a negative impact in terms of climate change. However, it must be acknowledged that if the incoming waste was not managed within the emerged facility, it would require management at an alternative facility, with DEF acknowledging that the choice of facility to manage residual waste currently is either landfill or energy recovery. The DEFRA publication Energy from Waste, a guide to the debate, acknowledges that when waste is disposed, it will result in the release of carbon dioxide emissions. And it identifies that the pressing problem at the current time relating to waste management and its wider impact to climate change is getting waste out of landfills, since the landfilling of waste currently has the greatest climate impact. The DEFRA guide acknowledges that currently within the UK, I think I've already said that. That the choice is between landfill and disposal, and that energy from waste currently provides a better environmental solution than landfill for the management of residual waste in most scenarios. The plan application incorporates a detailed assessment of carbon emissions, and its key findings have been summarised in the committee report. In comparative terms, the use of the emerged facilities calculated to result in a net reduction of 106,079 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year compared to managing the same quantity and composition of waste within a landfill. It is acknowledged that there are many variable factors that can influence the actual level of carbon dioxide emissions, and resulting differences in the calculated carbon dioxide output of the facility. But in almost all scenarios, energy from waste results in lower comparative carbon emissions than disposing of the equivalent amount of waste in a landfill facility. The government is committed to bringing all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050 through a transition towards lower carbon technologies over the next 30 years. There is presently not a legislative requirement for the Emerge facility to be net zero in terms of carbon dioxide emissions on its day of opening, and to impose a requirement for the Emerge facility to be carbon neutral on its day of opening would almost certainly make the deliverability of the scheme economically unviable, meaning that the plant would be unlikely to be constructed and the benefits derived from the operation of the facility, including the carbon savings against landfill, would be lost. Policy compliance with net zero is likely to be achieved through legislative and policy changes at a national level, including pollution control and taxation over future years. In making the planning decision, it is reasonable for the planning authority to assume that the Emerge facility will comply with future environmental laws, including pollution control and taxation aimed at regulating emission standards and carbon dioxide releases, and work on the basis that if the Emerge facility did not comply with these future emission standards, the pollution regime would either not allow the facility to operate or make it economically impossible for it to operate. The plan application is supported by a roadmap to net zero, which sets out ways in which the facility is capable of decarbonising throughout its operational life in response to changing legislative requirements. In terms of how the facility will comply with UK energy policies and renewable low carbon energy generation, as I've already said, the environment statement identifies that the waste fuel used to power the Emerge facility would incorporate a mix of material of which about 60% would be renewable. Therefore, of the 43.4 megawatts of electricity exported to the grid, the Emerge facility, the renewable proportion would be about 24.2 megawatts. The DEFRA publication, Energy from Waste, A Guide to the Debate, confirms that energy from residual waste is a partially renewable energy source, normally referred to as a low carbon energy. The energy produced by the Emerge facility would assist in providing security of electrical supply, utilising UK-sourced dependable residual waste and lessening the dependence on insecure foreign imports of carbon-rich fossil fuels for energy. The facility would provide diversified energy in accordance with government policy to have a wide range of different energy generators and move away from the concentration of coal, gas and nuclear energy. The energy produced within the Emerge facility would not be intermittent in nature or subject to the vagaries of the weather like most other renewable energy, and the electricity is readily dispatched to the grid. The Emerge facility would therefore positively contribute to meeting the objectives of the government's energy policy and is supported by Rushcliffe Local Plan Policy 16. Government policy advisors at low carbon benefits should be given significant weight within the overall planning balance. However, there is not part of the energy from this facility is electrical, part of it is potential heat energy. There is not an identified user for that heat energy at the present time, and therefore some of the potential efficiency of the plant would not be initially maximised on the day of commissioning. Therefore, in the overall planning balance, because the low carbon energy produced by the Emerge facility does not incorporate heat energy, the beneficial weight given to the energy is moderate rather than significant weighting because of the lack of a heating network at the time of commissioning. In terms of the location of the emerged facility in relation to spatial planning policies incorporated in the development plan, the proposed Ratcliffe site is located within the Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station site, which is an established employment site and is previously developed land. The analysis of the locational aspects of the development plan concludes that it is supportive of the development. Key policy support is provided through Waste Core Strategy Policy WCF 7, which promotes the use of industrial and previously developed land for energy recovery facilities, and Policy WCS 4, which supports the development of large-scale waste treatment facilities in close proximity to Nottingham with good transport links. There is also policy support for the development of the power station provided by Rushcliffe Core Strategy Policy 5 and Rushcliffe Local Plan Policy 15. The site is in the Greenbelt, and in terms of Greenbelt compliance, the development has been assessed against National Planning Policy Framework on Greenbelt policy, and in particular the requirements of paragraph 145G relating to the redevelopment of previously developed land within the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt assessment identifies that there would be some negative impacts associated with the construction of the emerged buildings, which would have a greater impact on the open character of the site than the existing area of hard standing. But across the wider power station site, it is acknowledged that the impacts would be mitigated through the demolition of the two cooling towers. Because there would be a period of time when the cooling towers and the merged facility would coexist on the site, and therefore there would also be a transitionary period where there would be some impacts to the openness whilst both structures are on the site. It's therefore assessed that the development does not fully comply with the requirements of NPPF paragraph 145G, and the development has therefore been assessed as inappropriate development in the context of Greenbelt policy. NPPF paragraphs 143 and 144 set out a clear policy requirement insofar that inappropriate development should not be granted planning permission in the Greenbelt except where very special circumstances can be demonstrated, and in such cases only where the harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations having regard to the substantial weight that should be given to any harm to the Greenbelt within that planning balance. In terms of making the assessment of whether very special circumstances exist, the transitional and site-specific impacts to the openness of the Greenbelt and harm by reason of inappropriateness have been given substantial weight in the assessment. Other harms on the development have also been considered. Very special circumstances have been identified, and it is noted that the key concerns relating to compliance with Greenbelt policy have been significantly rebalanced by the arrangements to demolish the two cooling towers across the wider power station site. Following the demolition of those two cooling towers by 2030, which would be secured by planning condition, it is concluded that there would be an overall gain in terms of the openness of the Greenbelt when viewed across the wider power station site. Other key benefits taken into account relate to the sustainable waste management, the production of low carbon energy, reductions in carbon dioxide emissions, and job creation, including the national and local policy support for these benefits. Overall, it is concluded that very special circumstances do exist, and these benefits clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt and any other harms. The proposed development, therefore, is considered acceptable in the context of Greenbelt policy, albeit as a departure in the context of NPPF paragraphs 143 and 144. In terms of the socio-economic considerations, a number of socio-economic benefits with the development have been identified, including an inward capital investment of 330 million, creation of 45 permanent jobs in the site, and a further 81 jobs indirectly. And during the construction, the site will create 600 temporary skilled jobs These factors are a material planning consideration in the overall planning balance. In terms of considering the environmental effects of the development, the slide sets out the key environmental effects of the development. In terms of air quality, pollution and health, consultation advice in connection with the plan application has been taken from the Environment Agency, Public Health England, Nottingham County Council Public Health and Rushcliffe's Environmental Health Department, all of whom have raised no objections to the development in terms of the effects on human health and air quality issues. The Emerge would operate under an environmental permit issued by the Environment Agency. This permit would regulate the level of emissions from the process, and therefore, for the purposes of the planning decision, the planning authority can be satisfied that the operation of the facility would be appropriately regulated to ensure that it meets air quality, pollution and health controls. In terms of highway matters, vehicle access to the Emerge facility would be from the A453 via the Westleigh Junction, which provides a separated dumbbell junction below the carriageway served by slip roads to enable vehicles to accelerate and de-accelerate onto the A453. The traffic assessment supporting the planning application gives consideration to the effects of both construction and operational traffic flows on the highway network. Whilst the operation of the facility would generate over 300 HGV deliveries a week, 600 movements a day, each weekday, the roads serving the development are of a good standard and appropriately designed for use by HGVs. The location of the site is served directly from a dual carriageway and remote from sensitive residential receptors, thus ensuring that HGV movements would not give rise to any significant impacts in terms of highway capacity or traffic amenity issues. A lorry routing agreement is recommended through a Section 106 agreement to ensure that the delivery vehicles access from the A453 and do not use any of the more rural character roads in the wider area. In terms of the landscape effects, the Emerge buildings would be similar in character to the existing buildings on the site, and significant harmful landscape impacts are not anticipated. In terms of visual impacts, the scale of the Emerge facility means that it would have a visual effect in the wider area. But these visual impacts would be reduced by the design of the building, which incorporates a multi-height roof to minimise the overall height of the building, and also the grouping of the building within the wider power station site, including the buildings which are scheduled to be retained following the power station's closure. In terms of ecology, the development is not anticipated to result in any significant ecological effects. A series of planning conditions are recommended to ensure that any residual effects are appropriately mitigated and compensated, and thus ensure the relative policy tests relating to ecological protection are satisfied. In terms of heritage effects, the new buildings and flue stack would be visible from a number of conservation areas and listed buildings, and this would result in some minor impacts to the setting of these heritage assets. However, the magnitude of impact is considered to be less than substantial. Paragraph 196 of the National Planning Policy Framework provides scope to weigh the public benefits of the proposal against the impacts to the historic environment. Consideration of this balance is provided within the conclusions section of the report. There would also be a loss of the heritage asset of the area resulting from the demolition of the two cooling towers, which are identified as being of local interest value. In terms of the archaeological effects, previous uses of the development are likely to have impacted any historic archaeological features, but there may be some undisturbed archaeological features on the site. A planning condition is therefore recommended to require archaeological investigation and recording to be undertaken as part of the development scheme. In terms of potential amenity issues relating to noise, dust, vibration, litter, odour and vermin, The environment statement provides detailed consideration of these matters, where it is identified that the design, operational controls and the remoteness of the site from sensitive residential receptors ensures that the construction and the operation of the facility would not result in any significant adverse impacts to amenity. A series of planning conditions are recommended to provide appropriately regulatory control. Overall, it is concluded that the development can be undertaken without resulting in unacceptable impacts on any element of environmental quality or the quality of life of those living or working nearby, thus ensuring compliance with waste core strategy. The application site is located within East Midlands Airport safeguarding zone. We've taken detailed advice from the airport safeguarding team. They have raised no objection to the plan application and have recommended a series of planning conditions as part of the decision. You do, yeah. I'll hand over to my colleague Jonathan to deal with the late representations.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, committee. Yes, we've had some late representations received, as was mentioned earlier on, and officers have had sight of those, and I'm just going to now briefly summarise them and just confirm what officers' responses to those matters. An email was sent to all members of committee on the 17th of June from Nottingham Friends of the Earth, raising the following concerns. It raises concerns regarding the CO2 emissions from the facility and challenges the officer's report claim that the facility will be low carbon. It criticises the way the report deals with CO2 emissions from biogenic waste, that the only alternative to burning the waste is by landfilling it, and that the electricity generated would offset that produced by gas turbines, but not by renewable sources. The representation also highlights what are considered to be vague claims in the report regarding the use of combined heat and power and carbon capture and storage in the future, with no commitment to deliver either. Representation states that the Environment Agency cannot refuse a permit application on the grounds of climate change, thereby confirming that this is a matter for committee to consider. It is requested that members consider seeking expert advice on climate emissions. Finally, the representation considers it is unfortunate that the application is being reported to committee before the Environment Bill adopts stronger policy, which might affect consideration of waste arisings and climate policy. Friends of the Earth therefore supports the application being called in for determination. In response to those matters, officers' assessment of climate change issues is set out in detail in the report from paragraphs 310 to 357. In particular, paragraph 315 sets out why the proposed development can be considered to be a source of low carbon energy, referencing the DEFRA publication, Energy from Waste, a guide to the debate. Paragraph 333 of the report confirms that biogenic waste, which makes up around 60% of the expected waste stream, is classed as climate change neutral, as these biogenic wastes, such as food, paper and wood, grow and capture carbon and are then burnt and release carbon in a relatively short life cycle, compared to the burning of oil containing plastic or coal, which takes millions of years to create. As just highlighted in the presentation, paragraph 253 in the accompanying table in the report sets out in detail the levels of recycling that have taken place in the county in recent years, confirming that recycling rates are significantly below the 70% target in the waste core strategy. Paragraph 262 of the report confirms that the lower rates of recycling mean that a higher proportion of waste is being collected as residual waste and either sent to an energy recovery facility for treatment or disposal at landfill. Paragraph 334 of the report highlights the DEFRA Energy from Waste Guide, which confirms that when calculating the net level of carbon emissions of an energy recovery facility, it is appropriate to deduct from the gross carbon output the carbon emissions that are displaced by producing the equivalent energy output at an alternative generating facility. The guide confirms that, and I quote, "A gas-fired power station is a reasonable comparator, as this is the most likely technology to be used if you wanted to build a new power station today," unquote. Furthermore, paragraph 384 of the report highlights that the energy generated by the emerged facility would be constant, like that produced by a gas power station, adding to the country's energy baseload, something which wind and solar cannot achieve due to the ever-changing weather as Mike has earlier pointed out. The report acknowledges that the emerged facility is not anticipated to have a market to export residual heat from day one of commissioning, but the potential exists for this to be the case, and this is detailed in paragraphs 324 to 329 of the report. Recommended condition 26 requires this matter to be kept under review. Paragraph 346 of the report confirms that there is no regulatory requirement for this facility to be carbon capture ready and does not form part of the application. This is reflected in the weight given to the carbon benefits of the proposal. Officers are satisfied that the carbon emissions assessment undertaken by the applicant takes account of the relevant factors which influence the comparative balance in carbon emissions between landfills and energy from waste facilities, as identified in Chapter 2 of DEFRA's Energy from Waste Guide. The results of the applicant's appraisal are consistent with the conclusions reached within the DEFRA Guide, which confirms that energy from waste is generally beneficial compared to landfill in terms of the level of carbon emissions. Officers do not consider that there are any valid planning reasons to delay the determination of the application to wait for the Environment Bill to pass into law. In a letter dated the 17th of June addressed to Mr Hankin, UK Without Incineration, or UK WIN, highlights what it considers to be some misleading statements within the officer's report, namely that the claimed findings of very special circumstances in relation to Greenbelt policy is unsupportable due to uncertainties regarding the claimed climate change benefits and the absence of any independent expertise ruling out the prospect that the development could have serious adverse climate change impacts. The letter also highlights a failure to assess the impact of taking into account UK WIN's climate change arguments alongside the ecological arguments from Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust on the balancing act for the development. The letter suggests an incorrect assertion that incineration is low carbon for planning purposes, and also suggests an incorrect interpretation of the main intentions of policy WCS4 to focus development in or close to the built-up areas of Nottingham and Mansfield Ashfield, and incorrect classification of development as being in or close to these areas. It also highlights a failure to recognise the legal precedent that development proposals can be refused on climate change grounds, and the relevance of the proposed installation not being in the emissions trading scheme. And finally, it highlights uncertainties surrounding the potential climate change impacts. The claimed climate change benefits should be given at best limited weight in the overall planning balance. In response, the report at paragraphs 412 to 443 sets out a detailed assessment of the application against Greenbelt policy, which has just been summarised in the presentation. In particular, paragraphs 436 to 438 set out the very special circumstances which officers consider exist to clearly outweigh the harms of the Greenbelt and any other harm. Again, as highlighted in response to the previous late representation, officers are satisfied that the carbon emissions assessment undertaken by the applicant takes account of the relevant factors which influence the comparative balance in carbon emissions between landfills and energy from waste facilities, as identified in Chapter 2 of DEFRA's Energy from Waste Guide. The result of the applicant's appraisal are consistent with the conclusions reached within the DEFRA Guide, which confirms that energy from waste is generally beneficial compared to landfill in terms of the level of carbon emissions. The concerns of the Wildlife Trust have been acknowledged and considered in the report, but both the County Council's ecologist and Natural England have not objected to the application, with the county ecologist recommending a number of conditions which have been included in those recommended with the report. Officers therefore consider that the appropriate weight has been attached to ecological concerns in the overall balance of the application. Again, officers' assessment of climate change issues is set out in detail in the report from paragraphs 310 to 357, including details as to why the proposed development can be considered to be a source of low carbon energy, referencing the DEFRA publication Energy from Waste, a guide to the debate. Policy WCS4 of the Waste Core Strategy seeks to establish broad locations for waste treatment facilities, with large-scale facilities supported in or close to the built-up areas of Nottingham and Mansfield Ashfield. There is a plan in the Waste Core Strategy which indicates the extent of these broad locations. The plan is schematic with limited background setting and is not to scale, and the emerged development site is towards the southern edge of the built-up area of Nottingham. It is worth noting that the improvements to the A453, which have improved access to this part of the county, do post-date the adoption of the waste core strategy. Finally, on this matter, the report considers all material planning considerations, and in the conclusions and planning balance section of the report, which Mr. Hankin will talk about shortly, from paragraph 682 onwards, this details the weight that officers have attached to each of these material considerations. This includes consideration of climate change impacts in paragraph 684D, where moderate beneficial weight is attached. An email from Stop Ratcliffe Incineration Campaign was forwarded to Councillor Butler at the weekend. The email effectively copies and pastes large sections of the late representation from UK Wind, which I've just summarised, which I've just been through, and so I don't intend to repeat. Rushcliffe Borough Councillor Caris Thomas, who is the Borough Councillor for Leek Ward, has sent in an email to officers, copying in Councillor Butler, asking whether British Gypsum have been consulted on the application. Her understanding is that the site overlies gypsum deposits and that development should take account of danger from existing mine workings, if there are any, or the possibility of sterilisation of mineral reserves not yet mined. Councillor Thomas indicates that the site appears to be in an area consented for mining through a planning permission issued by the County Council. Officers can confirm that the application does lie within a minerals safeguarding area, which are areas of land which the County Council, as the Minerals Planning Authority, has identified as containing important mineral reserves which are worthy of protection to avoid them becoming sterilised by other development. The safeguarding area for the application site relates to underground gypsum extraction, which takes place across a large area of the south of the county, with the mine mineral brought to the surface at British Gypsum's Plasterworks at East Leek. The safeguarding area in and around the power station, which also benefits from planning permission, covers the northern part of the power station site and extends north towards, but not including, Thrumpton. Policy SP7 of the Nottinghamshire Minerals Local Plan states that non-minerals development within mineral safeguarding areas will have to demonstrate that mineral resources will not be needlessly sterilised as a result of the development, and that the development would not pose a serious hindrance to future extraction in the vicinity. Similarly, Policy 42 of the Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2 states that development will not be permitted which would sterilise mineral resources of economic importance or pose a serious hindrance to future extraction in the vicinity. Where development proposals are located within minerals safeguarding areas, prior extraction of such minerals will be encouraged, subject to whether this is practicable or economically feasible. British Gypsum have now been contacted pursuant to the requirements of Policy SP7 and Policy 42, and have confirmed that they have been notified of the application by the applicant. British Gypsum have confirmed that they have no objections to the application, as it has no impact on current or foreseeable operational areas for gypsum extraction. On that basis, it is considered that the proposed development accords with Policy SP7 of the Minerals Local Plan and Policy 42 of the Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2, insofar as no important mineral reserves would be sterilised as a result of the proposed development. Councillor Thomas has also emailed County Councillor Matt Barney, copying in Councillor Butler, Councillor Upton and Councillor Adair, in which she includes a speech she made to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Planning Committee when Rushcliffe considered the application as a statutory consultee. Her speech raises concerns about the lack of a firm commitment to carbon capture, the lack of a guaranteed market for the heat generated by the proposed facility, and her consideration that the plant would not be a low carbon solution for waste disposal or energy production, thereby raising concerns about its impact on the wider redevelopment of the power station site. She also queries the need for the facility to process the county's waste, particularly given future initiatives on recycling and separate food waste collection. She considers the facility will be better located closer to the concentration of population as part of a more holistic waste management site incorporating sorting, reuse and recycling, composting and anaerobic digestion of organic material, with incineration being the last resort for residual waste. Councillor Thomas also raises concerns about HGVs and references the 2-hour radius which waste might come from, but queries if that area or the country as a whole needs that additional capacity. Finally, she refers to the lack of a strong commitment to use rail rather than road and the additional carbon from road journeys. Councillor Thomas moved a motion that Rushcliffe Borough Council oppose the application, but your report confirms that the Borough Council has raised no objection. I've already responded on matters related to carbon capture, the use of residual heat and whether the facility would be low carbon. On the impacts of the proposal on the wider redevelopment of the power station site, it should be noted that the applicant company Uniper owns the remainder of the power station site, and they clearly see the proposed emerged facility as an integral part of the wider regeneration of the site, albeit that those plans have not yet been made public. Whilst acknowledging the potential for the wider development of the site promoted by East Midlands Development Corporation's vision for the site, these proposals do not benefit from either a development plan allocation or a grant of planning permission, and therefore little or no weight has been given to them in the consideration of the application in the report. Regarding the need for the site, this is considered in great detail in the report from paragraphs 246 to 309 and has been summarised in the presentation to you today. This has included consideration of the facility managing waste from outside the county. With regards to the site forming part of a more holistic waste management site, whilst this is a perfectly valid suggestion, the Waste Planning Authority can only determine applications before it, which is what the report has been drafted to help you do. Regarding the commitment to the use of rail to transport waste, the retention of the railhead would be secured through a legal agreement so that it would be available in the future should contracts be secured which allow for waste to be transported in that way. All members on committee have received an email from City Councillor Michael Edwards. It queries the suggestion in the report that the residual heat from the emerged facility could be utilised by housing on the Fair and Pastures estate, which is close to Clifton Estate and is in the process of being constructed, due to the significant distance between that development and the emerged site and the cost that would be involved in constructing the infrastructure required to transport the heat. Councillor Edwards suggests that there should be a more urgent and credible review on the effective use of heat from the steam exhausted from turbines as an additional requirement within Condition 26. Councillor Edwards also makes reference to the Freeport and the potential for the site to host a nuclear fusion centre. These are not considered to be material to the application under consideration today. The report specifically considers the potential for use of heat in paragraphs 323 to 331, with a number of potential options identified. However, as there will be no immediate use for the residual heat upon commissioning of the emerged facility, the conclusion sections of the report at paragraph 684E tempers the support for the low carbon energy derived from the facility, including the residual heat. County Councillor Penny Gowland has emailed all members of committee this morning, raising concerns that the proposed facility is unlikely to be consistent with the council's goal of achieving carbon neutrality. Councillor Gowland then suggests that methane emissions from landfills should be addressed by focusing on improving the sorting and handling of waste and the engineering of landfill sites. She also raises the issue of managing the county's own waste and not allowing imports from outside the county. She finally states that the site should be used for alternative waste recovery facilities and not an incinerator. I consider that all these matters have been addressed in response to other late representations that I've just gone through. Chris Ward has emailed Councillor Butler late last night, suggesting that the proposed facility would lock the county into a commitment for 20 years and divert resources and efforts away from recycling, reuse and reduced consumption of plastics, and send a public message that it is okay to use plastic because it gets turned into energy and is sustainable. He also raises concerns about polluting the atmosphere. The report and presentation have set out in detail the levels of recycling in the county, and the need for the facility has been considered against a number of scenarios in terms of increased rates of recycling. Pollution concerns will be a matter for the EA to consider as part of the permit application. Finally, Julian Coles from Barton in Favours Parish Council has sent an email very early this morning. He's asked whether the HGV routing agreement can include a restriction on HGVs using the old A453, now referred to as Green Street, which runs parallel to the new upgraded A453. Officers consider this is a perfectly reasonable thing to seek, and officers believe that could be incorporated into any lorry routing agreement that forms a part of any planning permission that's granted. So that finishes the summary of the late representation. So I'll now hand back to Mr. Hankin to conclude his presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. I will now wrap up the presentation to give consideration of the plan imbalance and the weight that should be given to the benefits and harms resulting from the development. This is a complex plan application which has attracted considerable public interest. In formulating the recommendation, officers have closely examined all the evidence and representations that have been received. In accordance with Section 38 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, the decision on this application should be taken in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The plan application should not be refused planning permission simply because it fails to satisfy an individual policy, the test being whether the proposals accord with the development plan when read as a whole. Where there is any breach or tension in planning policy, this needs to be carefully balanced against the benefits which may be derived from the development. The conclusion section of the report sets out the key issues which officers have considered, including the level of weighting each issue should receive. In summary, the key benefits of the development are set out on the slide, and I will go through them. The benefits are the diversion of waste from landfill disposal and delivering more sustainable waste management at a higher level in the waste hierarchy. The facility will address shortfalls in residual waste recovery capacity in Nottinghamshire and Nottingham area. The facility will also provide additional residual waste recovery capacity to serve a wider regional area and assist in reducing the UK's continuing reliance on landfill disposal. The use of the emerge would result in a net reduction of 106,079 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year, compared to managing the same quantity and composition of waste within a landfill. The facility will generate low carbon electricity. There is development plan policy support for the development of previously developed land within the Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station site. Although aspects of the development are considered to be inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, it is concluded in this instance that very special circumstances have been presented to support a grant of planning permission. Planning policies support sustainable development. The facility will generate significant local employment and economic regeneration. In terms of the potential negative impacts of the development, they are identified on this slide, and they comprise of the development would have some negative visual impacts. The development would have some negative impacts to the setting of heritage assets, primarily as a result of visual intrusion from the tallest elements of the facility, affecting views from heritage assets, and also the demolition of the tool cooling towers, which form which are part of a larger non-designated heritage asset. And the construction and operation of the emerged facility would result in some residual minor environmental issues which have potential to influence local levels of air quality, noise, dust and ecology, but the magnitude of the effects would be within the parameters of established environmental limits and are readily capable of being mitigated and controlled through planning conditions. In applications of this scale and judgment, a judgment of the planning merits is required, taking account of the planning balance. Having regard to all the matters set out, the assessment of the planning balance in this issue is quite clear. Whilst acknowledging the minor adverse environmental effects of the development, the benefits it provides and the weight they should be given to these in the decision strongly supports a grant of planning permission. It's therefore concluded, as set out in paragraphs 696 and 697 of the report, and as shown on the slide, that subject to the imposition of the planning conditions and securing a Section 106 agreement, the overall balanced conclusion is to support a grant of planning permission. If members are minded to support a grant of planning permission, it will be necessary to refer this decision to the Secretary of State as a Greenbelt departure and provide the Secretary of State a 21-day period to decide whether he wishes to intervene in the decision and call in the plan application for the County Council are legally entitled to issue the decision notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hankin, for your very comprehensive report, and Mr. Smith for the responses to the late representations. So can I ask if there are any members who have any questions for the purposes of clarification only to Mr. Hankin? No. OK, thank you. So we now go on to the part. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
in a minute. Can we have some clarification on the paragraph in the report on the net biodiversity gain? So I'm not too sure on the figures on that.
Are you referring to? Have you got the paragraph number there?
Yeah, it's in here somewhere.
Incidentally, that would be very helpful as we
go.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I can probably find it through words.
OK, right.
I've marked it up, but I've been going through it. Anyway.
Because it's just bear in mind if we're picking up on any points later.
Somewhere around there.
Yep.
Yeah, somewhere around about 554.
554.
Right. Just in terms of biodiversity gain, the government have introduced targets. I'm not sure it's a legislative requirement at the moment, but the target will be that any new development undertaken, in effect, after the development, there is a net gain to the biodiversity than before the preceding development. We inspected the site last week, and when I visited the site, I'm sure you saw it. The site, it's not ecologically important site. It is a tarmac and concrete and stone surface. It contains very little vegetation. It's enclosed by electrified fence of the power station. It's actually to compensate. There's not much ecology on that site to actually compensate. Although this scheme predominantly is building a very big building to process waste, it does incorporate elements of landscaping works. There is a calculation. The calculation is undertaken in accordance with Joint Nature Conservation Council guidelines. That does show that when the site is built, it will have a greater ecological value than the existing site features. Is that
helpful?
Yeah. Yep.
OK, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, we go on to the part of the meeting now where we have our guest speakers, members of the public and others, and we have 5 speakers on this item. But before we start that, I'd like to ask Mr. Barker to read out the instructions and the guidance for public speaking, please.
Thank you, Chair. So each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, with the exception of Councillor Barney, who as a local member is entitled to speak for a maximum of 10 minutes. Notice will be given to you when the final minute of your allotted time has arrived by me saying 1 minute. You should not introduce any new material, be that new plan, photographs or written documents, and only issues relevant to the planning application should be addressed in the presentation. And these include the impact on local residents and the environment, relevant planning policies and government guidance. You should not refer to non-planning issues such as property rights, covenants, loss of property value or view. Members of committee may ask you questions for the purposes of clarification, and the chairman will invite the relevant officer to respond to any factual matters raised by your presentation or subsequent questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope that was clear. So we have 5 speakers, and on my list, the first speaker is Dr. Monica Pallis, who would like to address us. Is there a have you got a microphone? Is there a microphone?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Is it on? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Hello, and first of all, thank you all for declaring a climate emergency. Thank you for your commitment. But now for the challenge. When humans emit 355 billion tonnes more of CO2 emissions, there is a 50% risk of reaching the 1.5 degrees of global heating, which will wreak such devastating effects on future generations. 40 billion tonnes of CO2 is what human activities emit at the moment. Divide 355 by 40, and we have less than 9 years left before we reach 1.5 degrees. Everything you do as politicians to help stop those emissions matters. You've been told in your office's report that Emerge is a low carbon facility. You might conclude that you're doing the right thing in giving approval. Why then did the Climate Change Committee say in December 2020 that the emissions from existing and planned energy from waste facilities are becoming so overwhelming that, I quote, a substantial fraction of the plant pipeline will have to remain unbuilt, utilisation rates will have to fall, or else carbon capture and storage will need to be installed from the mid to late 2020s. Why did our country's leading experts say that if this is a low carbon option? Because understanding of the climate emergency and its solutions are changing so rapidly that council strategies haven't caught up. UK Wind sent you documents from independent experts adjudicating on other energy from waste proposals. These have consistently reported that comparing emissions from incineration with those from landfill is an inappropriate measure because it does not reflect the options for the next 20 to 30 years. For example, the treatment of choice for biodegradable waste is sorting and biostabilisation, which also produces sustainable soil enrichers, and landfill emissions will not even be a consideration. Your administration badly needs a sustainable waste strategy fit for a climate emergency before accepting the backward-looking waste figures you've seen in this report. If you're not ready to reject this application, I'm begging you to delay your decision and get independent expert advice to help adjudicate on carbon emissions. Planning permission can be refused on climate grounds, as UK Wind have informed you, and there are sufficient arguments from objectors that Emerge will have serious adverse climate change impacts for independent appraisal to be commissioned. Please don't rush such a huge decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pallis. That was well just within 3 minutes, so thank you for that. Do any members wish to ask any questions for points of clarification? Councillor Henshaw.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I mean, we've been presented with reports which, I mean, obviously are accurate, but if the specific point on whether or not it is a low carbon facility, I'm a little bit unsure. It may be low carbon in relation to what landfill produces, but is it acceptable to have a slightly reduced carbon emission rather than totally look at something that will not emit carbon at all? I'm sorry if I can't be any clearer than that, but I've still got concerns about the carbon emissions of this facility.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Henshaw. Bearing in mind that this is just a point of clarification from the speakers, that we'll be able to discuss. Yeah, when we come to the main debate, I think that might be the opportunity to, if that's all right with you. Right, and would any of the officers wish to pick up on or make any points of clarification or ask any points of clarification to Dr. Pallis?
Would you like me to answer Councillor Henshaw's question or provide a response at this stage? Or
I think
Or
wait
till
until
later?
wait until we get into the main discussion. I think might be better.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. No, nothing. Righty-ho. Thank you. So we go on to our second speaker, who is Jen Walker. So when you're ready, you will have 3 minutes, or up to 3 minutes.
Good morning still, councillors. I find the vague promises mentioned in the plan very frustrating and at times laughable. Firstly, the 45 proposed jobs. As a small business owner who employs 7 without tax breaks or upward investment, I would suggest this number is pitiful for the kind of justification for putting a giant rubbish burner in our borough. If I were sat where you were sat, I'd be asking for much more clarity about what these jobs are set to be. Are they skilled jobs? Are they shoveling rubbish? Are they just HGV drivers? My second point is with regards to the CHP, the combined heat and power element there mentioned, which is going to connect to Farron Pastures estate south of Clifton. Piping hot water in an insulated way is very expensive. This is used in Nottingham because the council was developing the whole of St Anne's and put a condition on the tenants of this new council homes that they were contracted to take district heating. An obligation still exists on the tenants and owners today. Is there a prospect for requiring individuals to take up district heating? 3, where is the rubbish coming from? What is this landfill that all this rubbish is going to that you are saving it from? Rushcliffe already recycles or incinerates 95% of its waste. 5% of it goes to landfill. I'd be asking where that's going to come from before I made any choice on this matter. Where will the residual ash be buried? Again, we're told this is a better alternative to landfill. It is not. The burning of fossil fuels in the form of plastic are still going to happen. That's petroleum-based fossil fuel and a finite resource. I've read that in the future, we're going to be mining landfill for the resources we no longer have because we've burnt them. You will be burning an essential resource as opposed to dealing with the waste and consumption issue. Would you buy a car now without brakes? Drive your family around in it with the promise in the future that brakes will be installed?
1 minute.
I implore this committee to take a long-term approach today and not fall victim to short-term thinking. You have acknowledged the climate emergency and the entire county breathed a sigh of relief that sense was finally sawn. But that commits you because there's implications of fundamental truths in that commitment. You have agreed that you're going to reach net zero. This incinerator will not give you that. You need to improve your recycling numbers to 70%. This incinerator will not give you that. Recycling rates drop. You have agreed to protect wildlife. This will not protect wildlife on that greenbelt. And finally, we need to take a long-term approach to decision making to protect future generations from the bad decisions that are made in ignorance. You cannot claim that you have made this choice in ignorance. I beg you to call it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Walker. Members, any questions or points of clarification? Councillor Ogle.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Actually, I thought it was this lady raises a good point. What happens to the waste ash? Because I know a lot of it will be reduced, but where does the waste ash go? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll come on to that in a moment. Any other questions, points of clarification? And bearing in mind, we'll be debating a little bit later on. Officers, could you perhaps pick up on that, or indeed have you got anything you want to raise?
Yeah, in terms of the waste ash, the incinerator bottom ash is it is a facility which does have an aftermarket. It can be used in the building industry. It gets used to build building blocks. It can also be used as a more general construction material. The main sort of end product from the facility, which can't be reused, is the air cleaning part of the process has a whole series of bag filters before the emissions from the facility are emitted to the wider atmosphere. They are filtered through a series of filtration. That does produce waste which has to go to a landfill. But the main bulk of the waste, the main bulk of the residual ash is the incinerator bottom ash. It is generally an inert material. It can be used for construction. They recover the metals out of that as well. So it doesn't get disposed of into landfills. It will get recycled, reused.
Yeah, supplementary, I take it that's breeze blocks.
Okay, thank you. Right, we no more points on that. Speakers. Oh, sorry, Mr. Smith. Yes.
Yeah, Councillor. All I was going to add was that there was a comment made about the types of jobs that were going to be created, and maybe that will be a point that the applicant might be able to pick on as part of their presentation. That was all.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know we have the applicant here, so I'm sure they've heard that. So our next speaker is Stephen Platt. Righty-ho, so you have up to 3 minutes. Just press the middle button and the light will come on.
Right, okay. I also want to congratulate councillors on declaring a climate emergency at the County Council AGM. It was unanimous, which is very, very good indeed. That means all the councillors here have voted for the declaration. A very good first step, but action follows, because today is the first decision resulting from that declaration. Now, I want to remind you the climate emergency is already happening. It's no longer just a warning from scientists. Forest fires in California and Australia and on Saddleworth Moor, floods in Nottinghamshire and around Britain and around the world. Food production around the world is falling. Ice is melting at the poles and in glaciers. I quote, "The Greenland ice sheet lost 1 million tons per minute in 2019. That's a headline from The Guardian on the 21st of August, 2020. 1 million tons a minute. Prince William's television programme said that sea levels would rise by 2 meters at the end of the century. I'm not as tall as 2 meters. Okay. What will happen to Hull? What will happen to Grimsby? What will happen to London? What will happen to Norfolk and King's Lynn? Faced with this emergency, you have a decision to make today.
1 minute.
To make that decision, you should heed the advice of the Committee on Climate Change, the CCC. The Committee on Climate Change is the statutory body set up to advise the government on the climate and how to reach zero emissions by 2050. And the CCC says, achieving significant reductions in the waste sector requires a step change towards a circular economy, moving away from landfill and incineration and the associated methane and fossil CO2 emissions, and towards a reduction in waste arisings and collection of separate valuable resources for reuse and recycling. In 2019, 53 UK incinerators emitted 13.3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent, of which 6.6 million tonnes were from fossil sources such as plastic. So the CCC says,
could you conclude,
no more
Mr. Platt,
emissions
please?
from landfill, no more emissions from incineration. Let's have less waste, and that waste should be reused and recycled. Can I carry on?
No, I'm afraid your time's up. Time is up, but we heard you very clearly. Thank you. Members, do you have any questions or points of clarification for Mr. Platt, please? Or no, it's okay. And officers, do you want to pick up any? In particular, Mr. Platt raised a point which I think a lot of people will have in their minds about the council's climate emergency declaration and how it fits in with this application, the contradictions or whatever. So perhaps if we can pick up on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd point members to paragraph 349 of the report. I will read it out. Yes, the report acknowledges the declaration.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry, I'll speak louder.
We're just picking up on the point you raised about the council's declaration of a climate emergency. So we're just picking up on that.
Yeah.
So paragraph 349 states that the terms of the council's declaration make clear that measures will need to be adopted in order to give effect to the council's stated intention to achieve carbon neutrality in all its activities by 2030. These measures have not been developed given the short time since the declaration was made, but the declaration has reinforced the importance with which the council attaches mitigating climate change and reducing carbon emissions. And officers have taken the declaration into account as part of the consideration of climate change impacts as part of the in the report. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Right, we'll move on to our next speaker now, who is Dr. Andy Reid. Dr. Reid, if you're with us.
Hi. Thank you, Chairman, committee members. I'm pleased to be able to speak in support of the application. I'm the redevelopment manager for the Ratcliffe site for Uniper, a site with an existing coal operation that will stop at some point. As you know, we've been working on the Freeport and the Development Corporation work very closely with you and Rushcliffe and the other local stakeholders on how to redevelop the wider site and contribute to sustainable economic growth in the region. Our vision for Ratcliffe is for developments that create high-value jobs based on modern industry and manufacturing served by an on-site energy hub. This hub would enable electricity and heat to be shared between the businesses on the site. And we see it as a key enabler and attractor for new businesses coming to the site. That's the vision. But in order to deliver the vision, we have to go step by step. And each step has to be standalone. We recognise that because the follow-on steps can't be guaranteed. Now, we believe with the Emerge Centre proposal that we have delivered successfully that first standalone step. It meets an existing need, as discussed, in that there's not enough waste capacity in the local region, nor indeed in the UK as a whole. It gives an immediate climate improvement by displacing landfill, as discussed, and it does have pathways to net zero and indeed net negative, which are set out in our application, given the right future policy from government. And ask me about that if you want details. It will give a boost to the local economy, and because it's capable in future of supplying heat as well as power, it can be the anchor project for the energy hub and help us to redevelop the wider site, attracting modern industry, manufacturing and high quality jobs. We also think we've put together a high quality application where the local concerns are heard and addressed. We've no objections from statutory consultees. We've agreement with your officers on all the proposed planning conditions, including, for example, keeping lorries off local roads and maintaining good community liaison during construction. The details are in Mike Hankin's excellent report. I commend him and his team. It's been a thorough job, challenging us at times, and I'm delighted that he agrees with us that this is a planning application that should be approved. If you've got questions, Nick Roberts and myself would be pleased to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reid. And so, members, do you have any questions or points of clarification? First hand was Councillor Ogle, then Councillor Creamer.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask, how can you be sure that the filtration facilities in your proposal will work, and could you enlarge on the filtration process, please?
Can I just clarify, you're concerned about the air quality emissions, is that?
Yeah, particularly dioxins and toxins coming out, yeah.
Yeah, they are. I mean, we are using standard industry processes, and we do have continuous emissions monitoring, and it is a sector that is very well regulated by the Environment Agency. So we will be carefully regulated. The Environment Agency, or what was it, Natural England report was that well-regulated facilities like this do not pose a significant risk to health.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor?
So you say that you're monitored by the regulation of the Environment Agency. Can you enlarge on that, please, and just say what processes that the Environment Agency have got to check on your processes? Thank you.
In terms of checking, we have obligations to measure the emissions and report on them regularly and report on any deviation from the standards. And it's something we've been doing at the existing site for many years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Creamer.
Yeah, it's just a general question. You said that you've identified the shortfall and to cover the shortfall, but as I understand it, some of the shortfall is from the county, some from the city. But both those facilities, either Sheffield one at the north and the actual city one, Eastcroft, are actually still working. So over time, will you actually be competing with them or assisting them? It's not a direct planning one, but it's just that I'm looking at the future of the site.
Thank you. If I may deal with that. No, we've assumed that both of those facilities continue to operate. The most telling diagram, I believe, in Mr. Hankin's presentation was the graphs. And what it showed is, even as we sit here today with 55 operating energy from waste plants in the UK, we've only just got over half the residual waste out of landfill. Obviously, Sheffield isn't a Nottingham facility. All Mr. Hankin's calculations in his committee report take into account the Eastcroft's capacity. Even though Eastcroft was first operated in 1972, it won't have a life forever, but we have taken it into full account that it will continue to operate at its current operating levels. So the demand exists above Eastcroft within the county. The variable was what recycling rate is ultimately achieved. Mr. Hankin gave you the range that the county need could be as low as 300,000 and nearly as high as nearly 600,000, depending upon what recycling rate is achieved.
Is that helpful? Do you want to?
It's helpful, but as I say, it's just a little bit concerned because I don't know those sites. It's not mentioned here per se, but if they expanded, and that was the reason for the question, would they be in competition at some time, and that their viability may or may not be in question?
There's probably no need for the gentleman to come back on that, but point noted. Right, no other points or questions? Officer, do you want to raise anything, or you're clear on? Yeah, okay, thank you. So thank you to all our speakers. I know it's not easy addressing a council and chamber, and thank you for keeping within the rules of timing and so on. Oh, I beg your pardon, we've got one more speaker, haven't we? I'm sorry, yes, we have one more speaker, Councillor Barney, who is one of the local division members. So yes, I wasn't ignoring you, I was getting ahead of myself. So Councillor Barney, you can address the committee as soon as you're ready. Thank you.
Not a problem, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Also, thank you to the councillors present, the officers, and the, I must say, highly eloquent representation that we've had from the other speakers, which I certainly heard loud and clear, so thank you. But as ward member, I share the serious concerns expressed by my residents and parish councils in respect of this application, and I speak on their behalf. We surround the Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station site in the ward of Leek-and-Ruddington, and we will be most affected by both the construction and operation of this facility. If planning permission is granted, there will be a very significant increase in road haulage movements to construct and then supply the plant with waste to incinerate. I have expressed these concerns to officers, As such, I acknowledge the recent amendments to the application that now stipulate all HGV traffic associated with both the construction and operation of the site will be restricted to accessing the A453 via junction 24 of the M1 roundabout to the southwest and from the Silverdale roundabout on the A52 in the northeast. However, I would like to seek further clarification on how this will be effectively enforced and what penalties might be placed upon any hauliers found in breach of these planning conditions. Parish councils have raised strong objections to the proposals, not least with respect to the hugely increased HGV traffic associated. It will be utterly unacceptable to residents for this condition to not be actively and rigorously enforced, and I would like to understand the mechanism to achieve this. I also note the comments received this morning from Julian Coles. I received that email, and I absolutely endorse his sentiment that the old A453 Green Lane must be included in those prohibited HGV routes. I am personally delighted that Notts County Council have in recent days declared a climate emergency. With the serious obligation, and I repeat that, with the serious obligation that this brings, I have weighed this application considering the inescapable fact that this plant will produce and emit CO2. Having studied carefully the evidence before us, I acknowledge that this site claims to deliver a net carbon gain of more than 100 tonnes per annum, as opposed to putting the same waste to landfill. If the modelling is to be relied upon, then I accept this net gain. However, considering the climate disaster which we face, I feel strongly that the applicant should be forced to adopt carbon capture measures at this site. I am informed at present that there is no legislative grounds to achieve this. However, as national government policy changes to enforce carbon capture, I would expect this to be retrospectively mandated. I would also strongly prefer Notts County Council to continue and accelerate its significant efforts to recycle even greater proportions of waste, so that the need for it to be incinerated or put to landfill is further reduced. And I know that my colleagues share this aspiration across party lines, and we will together continue to press for this, I'm convinced. I acknowledge that as the existing coal-fired power station is decommissioned, if this plant is granted permission, that it will enable jobs that might otherwise be lost in our ward to be retained. I also acknowledge that as things stand today, this proposal will harness power from waste that otherwise, at this moment in time, would end up in landfill. Power and heat derived from this site, therefore, would reduce the need to produce that same power and heat from other potential fossil fuel sources. Again, I remain highly concerned by the increase of HGV movements that will transpire in my ward, and express in the strongest terms that if this proposal is given approval, then we will be closely monitoring any breaches of the stipulated HGV access routes and will seek strong penalties for any such perpetrators. I conclude.
Thank you, Councillor Barney, and I'm sorry I overlooked you just now, but apologies for that. Very clear. Members, any questions? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. It's probably two questions, probably for officers to answer to clarify queries that Councillor Barney's flagged. Colleagues will be aware that HGVs are usually my pet question from the plethora of applications I've had in my own division. So I would be grateful to hear, given that we are the planning authority and not the we're not the operator who contracts with the HGVs. We do not have a direct management of those HGVs and their behaviours. So I'm asking for clarification about how we can cascade on that robust enforcement for anybody that breaches the routing. And Councillor Barney raised this issue of carbon gain versus carbon capture. So clarification about if and under what circumstances retrospective measures can be mandated. I'm assuming that's probably out of our hands as a local authority, but under what circumstances in planning perhaps government can put in retrospective and retroactive requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. That's questions more for the officers, I think. I don't think there's any more points. So do you want to pick up on the points raised by Councillor Barney and also Councillor Taylor, please? please.
Yeah, the two
Especially
points I'll
HGV.
talk about are the regulatory controls of lorry routing and also the net zero and the controls to net zero. First of all, dealing with the lorry routing, before I talk about the regulatory controls, I think it's important just to bear in mind the context of where this site is. It's located on the A453. That's a dual carriageway road. It's probably our most recently improved road in the county. It's got its acceleration, de-acceleration roads off the A453, roundabouts separated at grade. It's a very good access to the site. Lorry driver, we're not talking about a site which is down a network of country roads in the county. So, I think lorry, in practical terms, lorry drivers will use that route. But to reinforce the controls, we are recommending a Section 106 agreement. And to answer your question, what are the regulatory controls of enforcing that? It is a legal document. If the council become aware that lorries are not following the route, we can prosecute the company through the courts. In normal practice of any enforcement of most functions of the council, taking an operator to court is the action of last resort. We would look to work with the company to ensure that they follow the routing restrictions. HGV routing restrictions, the common practice on a lot of our mineral sites, Besthorpe, Langford, quarries have them. They are routinely followed. The companies tend to enforce them themselves. And in the Collingham area, the controls there to avoid lorries going through Collingham, and they are very successful. So we would be looking for the company to take the lead on enforcing these controls. We can prosecute them in court. Generally speaking, the 106 agreements, they have like a traffic light control or a yellow red card system that, if it's a first breach, to get a yellow card calling, and that will be a warning. And then they get a more serious warning of maybe the drivers are told that they can't deliver to the site. Ultimately, the company would ban the drivers from accessing the site. But the ultimate control is we would prosecute the company if they didn't follow the route through the courts. Thankfully, we haven't had to do that because the controls are complied with at the other facilities we regulate in this manner. Does that answer the low?
I think it probably does, but bearing in mind we're going into the full debate in a short while. Councillor Ogle, you wanted to, is this a point of clarification primarily
it's
for
about the lorries?
Council?
It's about the lorries, Chairman. I wondered how the rail link fitted into this, and would you rather do that?
I think let's
debate?
wait until we're into the main discussion about that, if that's all right. So no other points of clarification for Councillor Barney. I think we've.
Do you want me to deal with net zero?
The net zero. Yes, just to touch on that. Yes, please. Yeah. We go on. Do it in the debate later. Right. Okay. Now I will thank all our speakers, and it's not easy. So it was all very clear. Thank you very much. So we move on. I now formally move the recommendations on page 174 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Fielding.
I'll second that.
Okay. Thank you very much. And so we're now at the point now where we open up to the floor for discussion and debate. So any questions or comments from members, please? Councillor, this is your, yes, Councillor Ogle.
Yes, the important issue that Councillor Barney raised over the haulage, which is a wider issue. We've got a rail link there, and it goes directly to the city and north of the River Trent. And I would hope and encourage that the existing railway was used, well, certainly researched further. And I would like to hear from the developer how strong the commitment is and how much research has been put into using the railway and how feasible it is, because that would certainly reduce a lot of traffic from the north, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Well, we can't ask the developer to take part in the debate and discussion, but I'm sure Mr. Smith or Mr. Hankin will pick up on that, but do bearing in mind in the recommendation there is referral to the railhead and connecting rail linkages. But who wants to? Mr. Hankin, do you want to pick up on that, please?
Councillor Butler, thank you. I think you've partly answered my question for me in that response, but so thank you. But yeah, the power station does have a railhead. We saw it when we did the site visit last week. The railhead is to be retained throughout the operational life of this site. It will form part of the planning controls to require its retention throughout the operational life of the site. The question is, why isn't all the waste coming in by rail? The answer to that is that to get waste to the site by rail, you have to load it onto trains before you offload it at the facility. First of all, yeah, there are not an abundance of railheads to load waste onto the site within the UK to transport it off. That situation may change in the future, and that's why we are keen to see the railhead retained. I think the second part to the answer is that this facility is primarily aimed at dealing with local waste, local, maybe regional waste. The benefits of loading onto a train waste originating from, say, 10, 20 or 30 miles are somewhat eroded in terms of it's not effective. The waste is not just from point A to point B. The waste comes from a variety of sources in all directions, and unfortunately, HGV is probably the most efficient way of transporting that from a business point of view. But the railhead will be retained as part of the recommendation provided to councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Hankin. Thank you, Councillor Ogle. Next speaker indicated is Councillor Moxon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to go back. Obviously, there's a lot of environmental aspects have been brought up in this whole submission so far, and obviously the speakers have talked about that as well today. I just wanted to touch on what is the other option if we didn't go ahead with this. What is the other option? Because in my experience, not necessarily in planning, but just in business in general, a do nothing option isn't a standstill. Nothing else happens. There's always some ramifications for doing nothing. So I just wanted to get a summary of, if we didn't go ahead with this, is that it? Is the climate problems solved, or are there ramifications for not doing it?
Yes, please, Mr. Hankin. Ramifications.
Right. Well, I'll start from planning policy point of view and our waste course strategy. The strategic objective 6 is that the county council should provide a network of waste management facilities which broadly equate to the amount of waste we generate and require treatment. In terms of residual waste, black bin waste, we're not meeting that policy. We're failing to comply with that policy. There's a whole series of projections of how much waste shortfall there is in the county in terms of managing residual waste currently and in future years with increased recycling. I think the figures from in the region of 294,000 tonnes is the lowest, up to was it about 530,000, 560,000 tonnes, depending on what scenario you take. So we're not compliant with the waste course strategy strategic objective 6. So if no new waste recovery facilities are developed, we will continue exporting waste outside the county. In terms of our own municipal contracts, there's Eastcroft in Nottingham. Eastcroft, effectively, its gates are full. It takes waste from the city council, and I believe it takes county waste from Broxtowe, Gedlin, and Rushcliffe. That's 180,000 tonnes in effect. Rushcliffe's, so Eastcroft's full. All the other waste we create, and it's treated by recovery, is sent out the county. In terms of landfill, We don't landfill much. We've got one landfill, what we call a non-hazardous landfill site left in Nottinghamshire. When I started work here 20 years ago, I think we had 12, 13 operating. Bilsthorpe, Burnstone, Dorket Head. They've all closed. We've got Staple, which is due to close later on this year. So that's good. We're not landfilling much waste. But what we are doing is we're pushing it out of the county. Our municipal contract, like I say, that is signed. It's committed up to 2032, 33, but that relies on roughly 70,000 tonnes going to Eastcroft, 70,000 tonnes going to Sheffield, 70,000 tonnes going to Ferrybridge. In terms of our commercial industrial waste, you have to remember that waste streams comes from both household waste and commercial industrial waste. And when I say commercial industrial waste, this building, county all produces commercial industrial waste. That's that quantity. Commercial industrial waste quantities aren't audited quite the same to quite the same degree of accuracy as municipal waste. But there's at least equivalent commercial industrial waste, residual waste produced as household. That is all managed outside county. So the implications purely in terms of waste management, if we don't build more residual waste management capacities, we will send it out the county for management, and that isn't in accordance with one of the main objectives of our waste core strategy.
Thank you. Now I have got 4 other.
I was just going to say, should we take them first?
Yes, I'm just about to. Yeah. So I've got 4 other speakers indicated to speak, members. Before I go to the next speaker, who is Councillor Creamer, we have a thing with a computer here that's going to shut down in 16 minutes' time. And I suspect this is quite fundamental to this meeting, because whether it's to do with the YouTube link or indeed if we need to look at any of drawings and things. So is there someone from IT here who can advise us as to whether we should continue, or should we maybe take a short break to allow the computer to switch off and come on again? I'm not sure if there's anyone from my, or what do we think is best?
Yeah, perhaps, Chair. I'm not aware whether there's anything we can do to stop this
yes,
doomsday clock. I think it might have to be restarted.
It's a bit like Mission Impossible, isn't it? It's got to, it's so I think
So, Chair, can I just say that normally, and assuming that's what happened, the IT department does its updates on a Tuesday. What day is it today?
It's Tuesday. Yeah.
And it'll just have to finish and actually reboot.
Right.
That's normal. What happens to our normal?
Okay. Well, also I'm conscious of the fact that we've been sitting here now for 2 and a bit hours, and it gets a bit uncomfortable. So could this be an opportunity to take a short comfort break, perhaps, while the computer does? Because I'm really worried that if the computer goes off, it might affect the YouTube and people who might be watching, or all the rest of it, because the computer's late.
That is the case. That we'll just need a restart. I'm not quite sure what's happening.
Okay. So if members and colleagues, and please bear with us, members of the public, on this. I hope you understand the technology is beating us on here, but always leading the way. I will have Councillor Creamer, Councillor Upton, Ogle and Camilleri, who have indicated to speak, and Councillor Henshaw. If we take a short break now to allow the computer to shut down and reboot, it's 12:35 now. Shall we take a break for what? How long do we need? 10 minutes, 50? Shall we say, is 10 minutes enough for everyone, just to have a stretch of legs, glass of water, etc.? So if we'll adjourn now and aim to be back here at 12:45. Thank you. We are back on. So welcome back, and thank you for your patience with the technology. Mind you, it was probably the right time to have a little break anyway. So we'll continue. So my next speaker on the list here was Councillor Creamer, please.
Thank you. And just going back pre-T, totally agree with the railhead being there and understand the problems of not loading it. But we've actually put that there as a contingency, so it can actually happen if all it comes together. And again, I was just wondering about one of the comments from the local councillor about carbon capture. And being as it's going to go to the minister, well, may go to the minister, can we actually make a suggestion that we would like to have had carbon capture as near neutral carbon as possible? And so if it had actually been 50 megawatts instead of 49.9, it would have gone to the minister anyway. So it's a bit annoying in that way. But if at all possible, even if it's not a solid recommendation, but just something that says we would prefer it to be, if at all possible in the future, to be carbon neutral. Yeah, even better. So yeah, it's just a question on the law at the moment. I know the law at the moment is about to change, so I wonder if we can actually put it forward. We've already done it with the railhead. We've put something in there that says, you know, you can't do it now, but it's there. So something similar.
When you say referring to the minister, you're referring to the fact that this, if it goes through today, is to be referred to the Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, yeah. And if it had been 0.5 megawatts bigger, it would have gone. We wouldn't have come here in the first place. 0.5 megawatts.
Right. So, Mr. Smith, can you help us with this?
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Cream was correct in that it would have been a nationally significant infrastructure project if it had been a little bit bigger in terms of its output. In terms of, carbon neutrality, and I really do think that is probably something that ought to be dealt with outside this planning committee itself. If that's a commitment of the county council as part of any resolution to grant, then I don't know whether there's opportunities to make representations to that effect. Like we can't condition that at the moment because there's no legislative requirement for it to be carbon neutral, to have carbon capture. So I completely I get Councillor Creamer's point, but I'm not entirely comfortable whether this committee or whether something could come from you. I don't know. I think it's more a question for members to answer themselves rather than, I'm not sure.
So it probably wouldn't be possible to put a condition in as such, but is there any sort of advisory or Mike, Mr. Hankin? Yes.
Yeah, I can give a bit more information about the whole net zero agenda. Yeah, I think the first point to make clear at the present time is there's no legislative requirement for this facility to be net zero for this facility or any other facility in this country. So that's the current law. It's blindly obvious though that the government are committed to achieving net zero by 2050. We've heard from speakers about the Climate Change Committee and the recommendations they're currently making. Yeah, they are recommendations to the committee. They're a committee of the government. They will put their policy advice to the government, and the government will look at that advice, and they quite probably will accept it. But it's not law. It's the Parliament who make the law, as you all know, and they are committee recommendations. So there are recommendations by the Climate Change Committee, but it's not UK law. In terms of how this facility will almost certainly will have to decarbonise to meet net zero by 2050, and the applicant has supported their application with what they call a net zero roadmap. And I think it's important to look at net zero roadmap. It has 3 stages in it. That the initial, they have targets or goals upon initial development of the facility, middle term up to 2030, and longer term 2030 to 2050, aimed at decarbonising the facility, working towards an assumption that by 2050 it will have to be net zero. In terms of the initial design of this facility, you know, I think the key matters there for members to take account of is that the carbon savings compared to landfill. This is better to current practice. You know, managing residual waste. Currently, options for that residual waste is landfill or incineration. This facility is better. The design of the facility allows some flexibility for fuel input. The report does talk about, we've heard about the Environment Bill, which is going through government at the moment. That's going to introduce changes to how waste is both produced and collected in this country. In particular, two headline bits of news are it's going to seek to reduce plastics, mainly at the producer end, and it's seeking to deal with food wastes, biodegradable waste at the collection end. That will affect how this facility will operate. In very simple terms, if you reduce the amount of plastics going in there, you have less fossil fueled carbon emissions. You reduce the carbon emissions of it. If you reduce the food waste, the biogenic waste going into this facility, potentially landfill can gain in its superiority to incineration. It's very complicated, but the government are tackling both sources, and it's hoped that it will be more waste recycled, more waste diverted from landfill or disposal. But in terms of the facility will produce electricity on the day one. In the middle term, the objective is to incorporate heat and power. We've heard a lot about heat this morning. Government really do encourage heat from incinerators. The benefits of using heat is that electricity will decarbonise quicker than heat in the electricity grid as we move to a more renewable economy. Currently, they use quite a lot of that heat to generate electricity, but there is residual heat, and that can be used locally to generate, to power homes. Unfortunately, the realities of incinerators, though, is people will not sign up to a heat contract until the heat is available. It's almost a chicken and egg thing. Do you do the development and then retrofit the heat in afterwards, or do you do the heat and then build the development around it? I think we have to be careful about putting too much importance in this decision about future development in the Ratcliffe area, because it's not in an allocation and it's not got planning permission, the wider Ratcliffe site, but there certainly is some potential for heat load there. You've got the residential development on the south of Clifton. That they will be quite keen to take this heat, and once you get the heat coming off the process, it's more efficient, and the balance between landfill it could increase it. So the middle term is to develop a heat network. It's in the company's interest to develop a heat network because it's more money to them. They can make more profit out of it. There's a planning condition in there which requires them to keep an ongoing review to develop heat network over the 3-year period. It's something which we encourage, something government encourage, but it's difficult to put in at this stage because people don't sign up to heat until the heat's there. Also in the middle stage, like I say, there's changes to the waste feedstock, reductions in the amount of plastic waste going in there, potentially could decarbonise the facility. There's maybe, the company have taught that they might develop a wider waste park on here to pre-process the waste to decarbonise the waste going in. If you're not putting high carbon waste into the facility, it doesn't produce the same level amount of waste, high carbon emissions going out. In the longer term, the objection between 2030 to 2050 is to move to more net zero carbon, and that is, if this burns 100% biogenic waste, say, that there won't be carbon emissions or climate change carbon emissions from the facility. But also they can retrofit carbon capture equipment. Unlike a landfill is quite a simple piece of waste management. It's a hole in the ground which you put with waste. You can't do anything. This is a process, and you can retrofit equipment onto the additional process onto the back end to clean up the emissions, to capture the gases. You can tweak the materials going. You can change its carbon output. And in terms of compliance with the waste, with net zero, it will be achieved by pollution control. You know, the law is not there at the moment that this has to be net zero, but it's totally reasonable for this committee to work on the basis that pollution controls will change. And yeah, if this facility won't comply, it will close. It will be uneconomic to operate, or it won't operate. You know, we're on a pathway to net zero. You know, cars, we'll go to more economic cars, and we're, you know.
So the point to Councillor Creamer's question about the carbon capture, could it be then that a lot of this lies in national government legislation? So I think we know that as time goes on, legislation is going to change, and when that legislation changes, any facility, whether it's this facility or anywhere else, will have to move with the times.
It certainly will, yeah.
And they won't have any choice in that. So that I suspect that the answer is we probably don't necessarily need to address the minister at this stage, because we know that the government, and this would apply to governments of any colour, are very serious about the environment and the whole issue of emissions and the climate change. So at some point, I think I said earlier on, we mustn't assume, or you mustn't assume, but I think we can assume that legislation, national legislation, will change, and operators of these facilities will have to change with it. So that probably would be, or am I being too simplistic here?
I would hope. Thank you for your answer, Mr. Chairman. I would hope so, but a lot of times when the law comes in, it's not necessarily retrospective. So just a simple word like we would expect, you know, would be helpful. But yes, I understand exactly what you're saying. You know, but unfortunately, a lot of stuff isn't retrospective. So I was just trying to cover that contingency.
Yes, Mrs. Clark.
Chair, I just wonder if it might be helpful as well, just to perhaps remind members that, of course, this proposed facility, as well as planning permission, governing the use of the land in the public interest, which is what this committee is charged with determining. This facility would also require a number of other permits, including an environmental permit. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, with the carbon capture element and you know, control of emissions, that's something, whether that would be something.
The permit controls emissions in terms of the toxicity of the emissions, but it doesn't control it will not control the level of carbon emitted from the process. It will be wider pollution controls, and specifically, yeah. The Climate Change Committee will inform government policy, and that government policy will in turn become law, and this will have to comply with the law. But we can only determine this application today in light of what the current policy is, and the current government policy, yeah, the DEFRA document, they see this facility as better than landfill, and it addresses the immediate problem we have with waste, moving up the waste hierarchy. It's part of a transition.
Okay, thank you. Is that how, I've got a thumbs up from you. Thank you, Councillor Creamer. Good point. And it is an important point as well. Councillor Upton, you're next on the list, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As has already been said, this is a very complex planning application which raises many issues. And I thank the officers for a very comprehensive detailed report, which I have read, and the site visit, which I went to, which I found extremely informative. So thank you for that. Climate change, how to deal with residual waste, development in the Greenbelt, traffic and air quality, for me are very significant issues on this application, and I don't think there are any easy solutions to them. I support more recycling and the reduction in the use of non-recyclable materials, but for me there's probably always going to be some residual waste, and how are we going to deal with it? Now, I don't like landfill, and I'll not go into the details why, but I just don't. And I equally just don't like exporting our waste to other countries globally. I think that's incredibly wrong. So to create energy from it may be a reasonable intermediate option compared to the current practices. And I understand the point made about carbon capture, which Councillor Barney made eloquently in his comments, and Councillor Creamer, that we should perhaps progress in whatever forum how we deal with carbon capture, and the point made about retrofitting is a possibility, but the law often is retrospective. So I take those on board. I think Dr. Reid did say in his presentation words to the effect that this development has a pathway to net zero. So I'd be interested to get some clarification on that, if I may. I'm pleased to see the railhead is going to be protected by a legal clause, and that's mentioned in clause 696. So I'll not dwell on it anymore. I was going to mention it in more detail because I do have a concern about, at the moment, the proposal is everything is moved by road. Finally, it's in the Greenbelt, we know, and its proposed development, by definition, as my understanding, it's inappropriate development. And therefore, very special circumstances have to be demonstrated to support the approval. Now, for me, is there harm to the Greenbelt substantially outweighed by all the other considerations we've heard and we would be debating to give those very special circumstances? I've probably said enough for the moment, so I'll stop there. It's mainly statements. Apart from my question, if I may, I can't ask it to Dr. Reid, but could the officers just confirm about, in their opinion, is there a pathway to net zero for this development? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. So yes, is there a pathway to net zero on this? And we also we heard your points about the rail, the importance of the rail connection, and your observations about the Greenbelt. But the main point being the pathway to net zero.
Yeah, my answer to the previous question, I probably did use 100 words when I could have used 10, is yes, there is a pathway to net zero. And yeah, it's in the application. There is a pathway, and but in terms of the regulatory control for compliance with it, it will be looking to a wider controls within pollution control implemented nationally, rather than through this planning decision. Yep.
Okay, happy with that, Councillor Upton? Good, thank you. Councillor Camilleri, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Brilliant observations from you. I'd like to ask one thing. Is the technology for carbon mitigation or carbon capture at present, is it on the market? And if it is, if it is, in 3 or 4 years' time when this will be built, will the building be obsolete? So why not do it now? Why wait for government legislation to do something that we can do now and steal a march on everybody else? I can't understand why we have to wait for the legislation to do it. If we can do it now, why not do it now? And just ask me the one question: have we got the technology to do it?
Very detailed question.
Yeah,
and bear in mind that Mr. Hankin is the planning officer, is not the company and nor the applicant.
Yes,
so he can only really comment on what
is. Yes, Chair, but he knows a lot more about it than I do, and he has good conversations with the developers, and I think it's a question: why not do it now? Why wait for the legislation? Let's steal ahead. Let Nottinghamshire be the first to do it, and let's do it now.
Mr. Hankin.
I'm a planner, not an engineer. So I caveat my response in that. My understanding is that I believe I don't think there's carbon capture on any UK plants. I believe there's one plant on the continent with carbon capture. I think it is, the technology is evolving. There's confidence that the technology will go into production, but I'm not certain that it's available as of today to install. Why don't we do it today? I think I covered that in my presentation. Basically, the plant won't get built. Carbon capture is not a cheap process, and if this facility, if it was capable of implementing carbon capture on this facility and none others, it would be a trading disadvantage to other facilities. It wouldn't get built. And I think we have to take a couple of steps back and say, look, the pressing problem is getting waste out of landfill as part of the stepping stone to achieving more net zero and more environmentally friendly, sustainable waste management. if you refuse this purely, it's not net zero. Firstly, government law doesn't require net zero, and secondly, you'd be missing out on the 112,000 tons of carbon saving a year compared to landfill. Yeah, that's why it's not being proposed now. I'm not certain that the technology is there ready to install. This is a process, though. It's an industrial process, and the carbon capture can be, I'm a non-planner, bolted on at the end. And I'm sure Mr. Reid will tell us it's a lot more complicated than bolting it on at the end, but it can be added to the process. Yeah, I don't want to oversimplify the question, but the cost.
Does that help, Councillor Cameron?
Well, no, is it because it's no disrespect. If the technology is there now, it's going to cost £300 million to build. You're going to have the facilities, and I use your term, to bolt it on. Well, why don't we bolt it on at the beginning rather than wait till the end? That's my question. You've answered it. I understand your answer, but that's where I'm going to.
It's not proposed in this planning application, and ultimately, as a council, we have to determine.
We can only determine what's in front of us. But I think your points have been heard and no doubt logged by the officers and indeed the applicant. Right, Councillor Owen, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. You're quite right. We have to determine the planning application that we've got in front of us and determine it on planning merit, not on a wish list of future developments, not on a wish list of what we might like now. And it seems to me, having read a report of over 200 pages and listened to presentations that have lasted well over an hour and a half, some of which was repeating what was said in the report, we need to distill down into a number of salient planning factors, planning issues. And to my mind, the first issue is the £330 million of investment into Nottinghamshire. Now, why wouldn't we want that? Tell me, why wouldn't we want £330 million of investment, private sector investment into Nottinghamshire? We've gone on for a long, long time on all sides about lack of investment in this county. And here we have an opportunity to take in £330 million. And with it come, in the short term, 600 jobs. Some will be unskilled, some will be semi-skilled, and many are skilled jobs. Just the sort of jobs we want in this county. And long term, there are going to be 45 permanent jobs, many of which will be high-skilled jobs. Again, just the sort of jobs that we want in this county, and jobs that will encourage young people in the county to actually stay on and work in the county rather than have to go and look elsewhere. So I pose that question. Why wouldn't we? I think that's a material planning consideration. Why wouldn't we want that huge amount of investment? Now, I hear that the counter argument as to why we might not want it is because of the heavy goods vehicle traffic. And if there were 309 heavy goods vehicles going through villages in Nottinghamshire every day extra, then I wouldn't want it. I certainly wouldn't want it. I know what it's like. I represent a division where we've had heavy goods vehicles, not of that magnitude, but heavy goods vehicles where we had to get an environmental weight restriction put on. An HGV ban, in other words. Now, we're told that this will be conditioned through Section 106 agreements with the company, which I think is a good way of doing it. But as a backstop, if we needed to, we could put on environmental weight restrictions as well on all of those roads. And that is enforced, or it was the last time I checked, through trading standards. And I can assure you when in my division, that environmental weight restriction went on, it stopped the problem. So I don't regard the extra 309 HGV movements along the A453 as an issue. If you recall, Chairman, it must be 8 years, 10 years ago, this county council invested, I think, 20 million of its own money in widening the A453 so that it could accommodate HGVs and get them from the Silverdale Island through to the M1 much more quickly, and there is that capacity there. I've driven along that stretch from the Silverdale Island to I forget which junction, is it junction 24? Doesn't matter, that at that junction, and it does not pass through one village. Not one village, so I do not see the increase in HGV movements as an issue. I really don't, because the villagers understandably concerned, but I think they can be more than adequately protected and shouldn't be concerned about that. And then we look at Greenbelt, and I'm a great believer and great defender of Greenbelt. It is inappropriate development in Greenbelt. This sort of site is an absolute pain because it's in Greenbelt, but we all know it isn't Greenbelt. You know, there's nothing green about the existing car park there. In the area I represented before we had the boundary changes, there was a similar area called Watnell Brickyard, and that's an absolute pain. It's a former industrial site in Greenbelt. And so you can't take it out of Greenbelt because it would open it up to all sorts of development. So it remains in Greenbelt so that you can control any development that goes on it. But we know, I know, we all know, having certainly those of us that went to see the site last week, that it really is just a brownfield site which is called Greenbelt, and therefore it is just the sort of site that should be being redeveloped. And it seems to me that the arguments that it will detract from the openness of the Greenbelt, well, I looked around and I couldn't see more than a cooling tower away. I couldn't see more than a big gypsum store away. So to suggest that something that's not going to be as big as 8 cooling towers is in some way going to restrict the view across the Greenbelt is palpable nonsense, without any shadow of doubt whatsoever. And so I don't think the Greenbelt argument holds up at all. And then there has been talk about carbon emissions and the commitment of this council to whatever it did at the annual general meeting. I wasn't there in the afternoon, unfortunately, because we had a medical appointment which couldn't get out of. But to my reading of this report, this accords exactly with what the council decided at that AGM, and it's all nicely summed up in paragraphs 335 and 336 on page 83 of 242 of this report, where it tells us, and it's been mentioned time and time again, that there will be an overall reduction of 106,079 tons of carbon dioxide using the calculations that are the standard calculations issued by the relevant government department. And that is what we as a planning committee have to go on. That's what we do. That's what we've got to decide on. There is a significant reduction. I mean, that pales into insignificance when you think that humans exhale 3 billion tons annually of carbon dioxide. And you, Chairman, every day, apparently, are giving out 2.3 pounds of carbon dioxide. So there is an answer if we want to get to net zero. You know, there are other issues, and I understand. And I read this on the internet, so it must be right. It's got to be right, because I read it on the internet. 95% of carbon dioxide comes from natural sources anyway, such as decomposition. I think volcanoes were thrown in as well, but that's beside the point. So this is meeting our climate change obligations as elucidated at that annual council meeting. And I emphasize the point, net zero. That doesn't mean none's given out. Net means there's a balance. And so there will always be some given out. So that, I think, I've tried to, in my own mind, try to distill 200 odd pages, 2 hours of presentation into those points. And at the end of the day, I have come to the conclusion that there are no planning grounds, and I emphasize the term planning grounds. There are no planning grounds to refuse this application. And if we were to, it would go to appeal. We would quite rightly lose that appeal, and we would be stuck with substantial costs, and that would be an irresponsible use of council taxpayers' money. So I intend to support the planning, the application, and will vote for it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Owen. And all the points that you raised there are absolutely relevant and are planning points, and also quite entertaining as well. But they are very serious. The human the human output of carbon, of course, it could be argued that the more you speak, the more you But anyway, yes. So, but no, thank you for those points, and there's probably no need to come back on those, but we got your points very clearly. Now, I've got 3 more members who have indicated to speak. Starting with Councillor Williamson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Although I'm not sure I'm the right one to go straight after Councillor Owen. I mean, how do you follow that for passion? Certainly. Please, I've sat here now for several hours and listened to the points from other members, listened to some very eloquent speakers, so thank you for presenting that are still here, listened to the officers' reports. And I've got to be perfect, I've gone back and forth on this in my head, and I think there are 2 elements to it. There's clear environmental arguments about this, and I would query significantly some parts of this report. We make a lot of assumptions. You said yourself, Chair, at the start of this, we should never assume, but we're making assumptions about government policy. We're making assumptions on the actions of the applicant after this. And while I have no doubt that you do act in good faith, I have seen planning applications on lower levels that don't. They come with a lot of nice ideas, such as this road path to net zero, or even possibly net negative, and it just never comes to fruition. One of the big issues having this, it's the assumption that the food waste and plastic can be reduced at the same time. The entire argument is this 100,000 emissions lower is based on a comparison with the landfill. Now, if the food element, which is a big part of the environmental bill, a big part of the waste strategy review, if food waste is taken out of this, then the report itself acknowledges that in a lot of instances, a landfill would actually be a better use of capturing carbon than putting it through this incinerator. That it seems absolutely ridiculous to me that we're working off a methodology which, while I accept that we are restricted with this and we can only go off standard usage at this point, but this will change. This will change with the environment, but our comparisons will change, our standards will change. And I completely agree. I think it was one of the speakers said earlier, we need to be measuring this against future, not against what comes now. It seems utterly ridiculous. We've had mentions of heat benefits, right? And I am actually quite a big fan of district heating and group heating. I think it does have some considerable benefits. I think the benefits in this instance are quite suspect. I think representations from the City Council about the application in his own field and the potential use there, it doesn't stack up. The further that you transport heat, the more it costs, the more infrastructure needs to go in. And as a result of that, the more carbon is emitted in the construction of that process. It's not right. And as Councillor said, I've 300 million plus pounds of private finance. I welcome that. I welcome any investment into Nottinghamshire. but it all has to be balanced with what we declared a climate emergency for this council. The government has declared a net zero target of 2050, which I don't think is going to affect. This does not help get us to a carbon zero position. I fundamentally do not believe that it does. I think the climate change is a very, very relevant consideration in this, but it seems that it's put aside, and its conditions have been put in that I think are great. Some of the ecology stuff around badge useful. I would be very interested to know if those ecology reports also took into account great crested newts, bats, and other local wildlife that there are legislative requirements about, which maybe I've not seen them in this report, but I've only seen mentions of nesting birds and one small reference to badgers. I suppose a lot of that is by the by. We can only consider the application that is in front of us, and there are some compelling arguments in favour. But the big ones that I pick up, and has been said before, if we're all honest, we all know that this power station, the site itself, it's a brownfield. It needs redeveloping. Come 2025, it's short. Something needs to be done with it. What is done with that? I don't know. I'm not the expert there. I don't have the local knowledge that the local members do. I couldn't possibly suggest something that would be of benefit to them. But by the letter of the law, it's in Greenbelt land. So by the letter of the law, it is inappropriate. We have to establish that there is exceptional circumstances, and I do not feel in this case that we have done that. I think the entire argument and the equations that are used are based on false assumptions, and that doesn't work. And therefore, if they don't work, then there's no exceptional circumstance. And if there's no exceptional circumstances, it's an inappropriate development. I would welcome more expert advice on this. I'm not suggesting for a second it hasn't been thought through. I appreciate there's hundreds of hours of officer and applicant and opposition time gone into this. But I don't feel that there's a level of expertise and real assessments on the. I'm sorry, I'm losing my track because I'm quite passionate when it comes to matters on the environment, but I don't feel that we've done everything that was necessary. I mean, I would certainly support some form of deferral while we took in those extra expert opinions and see any other conditions that were taken on this. But there is not, to me, there's just not a case here for this. If it was committed to a net target of zero or even net negative, then I possibly would support it. But for the information put in front of me, I cannot honestly support this recommendation for approval. I'm waffling a bit now, so I'll wrap up, Chair. But
no, that's fine, Councillor Williamson. No, I understand completely, and it is an important application, and the points you raise are valid points, and they have to be looked at, and they have been picked up in the report and also by discussion we've had so far. Can we just pick up, though, the question about the ecology, the newts and bats, and have we got an answer on that side of things?
Yeah, the ecology report, it's basically surveyed the site to see what species there are on the site. I don't think there's any great crested newts. There are bats in the woodlands nearby. We've seen the site. It's not an ecologically important habitat. The survey's looked at the species and it's provided appropriate mitigation. They have to look specifically at the report to see what species they are. But it's been undertaken by professional ecologists, surveys, and it's been reviewed by the council. Notts Wildlife Trust, who disagree with some of its recommendations, but also Natural England. We're happy it's robust and it considers the ecology on the site.
Briefly, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a specific question. Do you mind if I ask specifically who carried out the ecology report, which group or company?
I believe a company called Argus. Was it Argus Ecology? Sorry, I can't ask questions, but it was a qualified ecologist. It's in the environmental statement, which is on the planning website. It's been reviewed by our own ecologist, who's happy with the conclusions reached. The site, it's not. If you've seen the site, you've seen the photos. There's nothing there really to support ecology. It is tarmac, it is concrete, it is hard standing. There's very little plants on it. You know, it's surrounded by an electrified fence. It's not a habitat of importance.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Henshaw, please.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, there are wide-ranging views and opinions on this planning application, and if we actually just base our decision, which is quite right, on planning criteria, then we must, as a committee, accept the recommendations. However, as has been pointed out by a fellow county councillor from Mansfield, Councillor Camilleri, why can't we, as a planning authority that's already passed a motion at the AGM relating to us being carbon neutral by 2030, why can't we push and encourage and cajole applicants to be more of a market leader in relation to reducing their carbon emissions? I mean, it's been outlined in the report that there is a roadmap to acknowledge this and to move forward, but I think we need to make any roadmap more robust and be more intuitive to changes in legislation that undoubtedly will come. And in Mansfield and District, we used to have what was called an incinerator that provided district heating for a large proportion of the Mansfield town centre. It even at one point heated the water in the local swimming pool. But as legislation changed in relation to emissions, it couldn't meet those criteria or those changes, and it had to shut down. And you know, this point's been made by the officer in relation to this development. This development will have to change, or more than likely, it will have to shut down. But in the interim period, it has still emitted thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, it has been mentioned that the average person emits 3.2 pounds of CO2. Some people emit far more than that. And as an ex coal miner, I think I may have contributed more to the climate change and CO2 emissions, including various other acid rain and things, than most people in this room. But as a ex-coal miner, what we did 20 and 30 and 40 years ago is not acceptable now. There is a climate emergency. We've acknowledged it. We've also said that we are going to take measures as a council to eliminate our carbon footprint. Some of us think we're not doing enough. We're not doing it fast enough. It may need major changes. How could a member on the new committee that's being formed in relation to the environmental changes go to that meeting, look at what's happening, and then, well, they'll just turn around and say, well, the planning committee's just agreed a planning application that's going to put thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. There is a dichotomy there. And I think, you know, these things are real issues, and they're not easy to overcome. We've been sat in this room for 2 or 3 hours. That is a fraction of what time is needed for everybody to address this problem, because it's all right bringing £350 million worth of investment into Nottinghamshire. If the result of that 350 million investment is that we're going to corrupt and degenerate the total environment of not only Nottinghamshire but of the country, then I don't think that £350 million investment is worth investing. Surely it would be better to invest that £350 million in some project or some facility that actually is going to benefit the environment. So the other point, I can't rationalise in my own head. We're having a facility that, on the face of it, we're burning stuff. We're not putting waste into landfill. So on the face of it, that looks okay. But how, and it's been mentioned by the officers and other members, we are not meeting our recycling targets now. How logically can you encourage people to recycle more if all you're going to do is take it and burn it? To me, there's an anomaly there, and I don't think by burning it you're going to encourage people to recycle, and that, you know, it just don't work for me. I mean, you've only got to look at the news last night. Amazon, one of the biggest and richest companies, private companies in the world, actually, there was a report saying that they put thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds worth of electrical goods into landfill because it's cheaper to dump it than to actually recycle it because of the storage cost. Now, I mean, what stupidity is that? It just does not make sense. And I'm very concerned. I know the officers have put all the information in, and on purely planning grounds that, you know, it may be difficult to refuse it. But why not, as Councillor Camilleri says, why cannot we be the front runners? Why cannot be the good guys and try and encourage people to do more? I mean, this is the only way forward. This is the only way forward, because if we don't do anything, you know, everybody's it's just ridiculous. I just, on the basis, I just cannot support this application, and I hope other members would refuse permission as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Henshaw. There's probably not a lot I can come back on there, but there is a lot of coverage in paragraphs, around about paragraphs 340 onwards, in connection with, and it's a very overused expression, but the roadmap to carbon zero. It is there, it is recognised and acknowledged, and we know that as time goes on, legislation will change, and as we said earlier on, operators will have to fit in with whatever the legislation of the day is. And indeed, I suspect as time goes on, there's an ever-growing public understanding and requirement that businesses, the public, councils do work harder towards an ultimate zero target. But let's be honest, that's not going to happen overnight. And I think this application is a step forward to achieving that. But that's just my comment on that. Okay, two more speakers, Councillor Ogle and then Councillor Upton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to address the Greenbelt and then go on to emissions. The majority of this beautiful county is not, well, parts of it is not Greenbelt. I don't go along with the sanctity of the Greenbelt, but I understand the material legality and significance within the planning process. But in this particular case, the site is brownfield, and that is the mitigating factor. So we can happily go along with that. On the residues, I'd like to come back to the officers on that, because I'm concerned about the filtration effectiveness, and I know that in the past dioxins deposition and residues from toxic materials downwind of incinerators has been an issue. I know that waste woods treated with preservatives and synthetic material residues, for instance, plastics, contribute to these depositions, and these are associated with inadequate temperature combustion within the process. Cases of existing incinerators where milk from cows has been contaminated by incinerators exist, and the milk has had to be thrown away, and there's been abortions within cattle and that type of thing. So I'd like the officers to come back and tell me why this won't happen in this particular site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ogle. Can you help with that, Mr. Hankin, please?
Yeah. I'll try to reply to you, just firstly quoting what the NPPF says on pollution control. And I'll read out NPPF paragraph 183, which states that the focus of planning policies and decisions should be on whether the proposed development is an acceptable use of land rather than the control of processes or emissions where these are subject to separate pollution control regimes. Planning decisions should assume that these regimes will operate effectively. Equally, where a planning decision has been made On a particular development, the planning issue should not be revisited through the permitting regimes operated by the pollution control authorities. This site to operate will need both planning permission and a waste permit. The waste permit controls the emissions from the site. And the guidance from the government, their national planning policy framework says if it's controlled under permitting, leave them to do the job. They're a responsible authority, work on the assumption that this facility is safe. I think, though, yeah, just taking a slightly wider agenda on that, we've consulted on this application with the Health Protection Agency, Notts County Council Primary Care Trust, the Environment Agency, and the District Council's Environmental Health Officer. They don't raise any objections. We've heard that there's 52, 53 of these incinerators operating in the country, energy recovery facilities. They operate successfully. It's tried and trusted technology, and they meet the emission standards. I think your fears about contamination of the surrounding environment, I think they're unjustified. But even if they are matters which should be controlled through the permit and not this planning decision, we should work on the assumption that the pollution control legislation will control that, and we deal with the land use planning issues as a planning authority.
Supplementary then, Chairman, I'm prepared to do that under the, but could we put our commitment into emission efficiency improvements and regulatory advances, which is what you're suggesting, by incorporating the condition to include any retrospective national legislation into the planning application, and subsequently the planning permission, if this goes ahead, and that will incorporate high standards if they are legislated for.
The practicalities of that, how?
I think I'm just thinking aloud. If there's additional controls over emissions in terms of climate change, that will be implemented at the national level. That won't be within the remit of a planning authority to enforce those controls. If it's regulatory controls in terms of emissions, that would be controlled through the environmental permit. Where we maybe do have some control about improving this process is in terms of the use of the heat locally. And in that respect, we've recommended a planning condition that they first of all provide the infrastructure as part of this development, that they get effectively the heat to the boundary of the site, and then they keep an ongoing review of the availability of heat loads in the area as the area is probably likely to develop, and they report to us every 3 years with how they are going on marketing that heat export.
But what the officer's saying, Chairman, is that my suggestion is incorporated into the regulatory processes already. Is that what he said?
I think that would be my understanding as well. But to be on the safe side, can we just get the legal? Do you want to make any confirm that that sort of thing is managed by legislation anyway? And maybe you don't need to add to that, but.
That's right, Chair. The integrated pollution control regime will and the other permitting regime paragraph 183 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which Mr. Hankin has just read out to committee, that sets out where there is a multi-regulatory regime. One must assume that the other regulators will do their job robustly and not infringe on what would be covered by those other permits.
Okay, is that helpful, Councillor Ogle?
Very helpful, Chair.
Right.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Chair, also just because obviously this is, there's been also talk about the council's climate change emergency declaration, and perhaps just to say a word, perhaps on the weight or how that fits in with the decision making of this committee, because obviously this is. But there's been obviously I can tell it looms large in the thought processes in determining this application or considering it. I mean, certainly, as Mr. Hankin's report says, I mean, the basic principle is that applications need to be considered in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Now, certainly, the courts have found that climate change mitigation is certainly capable of being a material consideration in the planning balance. And I think the declaration of a climate emergency by this council just underlines the importance which this council attaches to that and into meeting these ambitious targets. However, I think there are certain further steps or measures which would need to be implemented, and the wording of the declaration itself does go on to say, I think it tasks the newly formed Transport and Environment Committee with kind of looking at the measures, taking the lead and considering, agreeing and overseeing appropriate measures to achieve this authority's commitment to achieve carbon neutrality in all its activities by 2030. Now, for the sake of a planning committee, what does that mean? I mean, obviously, we're led by plan policies and government policy and legislation that we're in the process now of reviewing our waste local plan. Certainly, the climate emergency declaration is something which will need to be taken into account and should properly be taken into account in formulating those policies. But at the moment, the decision which members are being asked to make today, it's on the basis of the current position, the current policy position and current legislation. As I said, this all goes into the planning balance, and in Mr. Hankin's report from page 167 onwards, paragraph 682 onwards, there's the conclusion and planning balance, which examines the various things. As I've said, the courts have found that climate change mitigation is capable of being a material consideration. Economic considerations are capable of being a material consideration. It's the balance and the weight which is to be given to those material considerations. That is a matter for the decision maker. Now you have the officer's reports, and you have the officer has made the recommendation on the basis of the current policy and an in-depth examination of the policy and the law and the consultation responses. But ultimately, that balance, that decision is up to you, members.
Absolutely. We've got so much information in front of us as well to make that decision. Right. My final indicated speaker is Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Williams, and if I may, on the ecology particularly. I mean, I went there and I couldn't find any ecology on the specific footprint of what this application is about. As the officers have said, all I could see was tarmac, concrete and the rising. So I didn't see any ecology. I would say that when I look at the site plan for this particular development, it does show an area of soft landscaping. So from my perspective, I think that small area of soft landscaping will actually improve the ecology. You will get more ecology there than there is at the moment. I pick up on what Councillor Owen said about the Greenbelt, and far be it for me to enhance what he said, but I would just pick up on, yes, it's Greenbelt at the moment, but when you go there, it's most certainly an industrial complex. It's brownfield to me. And the fact that they're proposing to take down 2 cooling towers in mitigation against this development, in my opinion, when you're looking at the site then from the south, southwest, southeast vistas, then you'll get a more enhanced open countryside, which is what the Greenbelt's all about, because you're taking down 2 of the cooling towers. So I think there's a point to be made there about the Greenbelt. On the heat that's used, and we apparently think there's no immediate use for it. Well, hopefully, I would say that is used within the power station site, as other users are attracted to it. Not necessarily that you have the debate we had about moving it down many miles down the road. I would hope most of it could be usefully used within the site as it is redeveloped. And finally, on the carbon capture, Yes, I agree. It would be nice to have it now as part of this development. But what I'm getting the message is it's unproved technology at the moment. It ain't there at the moment. Therefore, by all means, when there is that proven technology that you can retrofit it, well, retrofit it, and the national government will probably have legislation that will compel you to do it. So broadly speaking, I'm moving towards supporting the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. Now, no other speakers have indicated. Councillor Fielding, you reserved your right to speak. Did you want to ask any questions or make any points?
Could I have clarification on the routing? It was said about an old part of a road, ensuring that things aren't going to go down there. Is that going to be dealt with if it was?
Yes, it will.
So that's the clarification of the route.
Yes, it will. It's from
on the old A453.
Yeah. The controls will be from Silverdale Island up to the motorway, junction 24. Lorries will be forbidden from using any of the intervening roads. So yes, it will be controlled under the 106 agreement.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fielding. Right, I don't see any other hands up. I think we've had quite a good discussion and debate on this, and this application was always going to be complicated, and you only have to see by the thickness of the report and the length of the officer report today, and indeed all the comments we've had from members of the public and other interested parties. It is a very important application, this, and we are it's a cliche, but we are the decision makers. We've got to sort of support it or not today, and that's what we'll be doing in a few moments' time. I think the main points have come out today, in particular the reference to the how it links in with the climate emergency that the County Council declared, and the general worries and concerns that I think we all have about the climate and climate change, which is getting ever higher up public perception, and also importantly the way the commercial world works as well. People are taking it seriously. Now this application, I'd say, is complicated. We've been working on it now for I don't know how many months, probably years, is it? But well, and it's full of legal and planning rules, laws, legislation that go with any planning application, but particularly important applications like this. And it's always going to be complicated, and it's never going to be an easy decision to take. But I think we've had a good debate this morning. We've been talking about it for, I don't know, 3 hours or so, 3.5 hours. And I think that's right. I know some members might get a bit frustrated about the length of time, but this is an important decision we've got to take for all the reasons we've heard today. So unless anyone else wishes to ask any questions or make any comments, I think we ought to perhaps come to a decision on this. I sense there's no more questions or comments coming in, so we'll move to the vote. And so I think we'll do it the traditional way, a show of hands. Can I have a show of hands for those in favour of the application, please? Got that. And do we have anyone against? I think that's 3. And do we have any abstentions? And 1 abstention. Right, so if you could confirm the result for us, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So that was 8 for, 3 against with 1 abstention. So that motion is carried.
Right. Can you just, sorry, can we just confirm those numbers again, Mr. Smith? You're just.
I thought it was 9 and 3 actually, but I'm.
So can we just confirm?
So we ought to take the vote again, Chair, just to clarify.
Let's be on the safe side. Let's take it again.
I do apologise, members. I miscounted. Could I just ask for?
Can we make it when we raise our hands? Make it very clear you're raising your hands at the moment you want to raise it and keep it raised until you're asked to lower it. So for all those in favour of the application, please show.
Sorry.
So that's
I'll make that 9 for.
Yeah.
Those against? I think that's 3.
3 against.
And abstentions is 1.
Sorry.
So that's 9 for, 3 against, 1 abstention.
Yeah.
That means permission is granted. And thank you everybody for your contributions. And also thank you again to the ladies and gentlemen who are visiting us today for your input, and it was appreciated.
Excuse me, can I just say, I left some papers, and if councillors want to take them away, then I'm very happy with that.
I'm sure they are in a safe place, and if members do wish to pick them up, they will do. Thank you. Right, we need to move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is for noting. This is item 8. This is the Development Management Progress Report. This is more of a formality, really, but to do it is sorry, Mrs. Gill, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of this committee, on a quarterly basis, we will bring a report to you which sets out the planning applications we've received, sets out the planning applications that have been determined, and also the work programme, which applications will be considered at the next committee. I won't go through the schedules with you, but if any members have any issues that they wish to raise with myself and the team, please do so. I would refer you to appendix, let me just find it. Oh, unfortunately it hasn't, page 239. It sets out what is likely to be coming for to you for the next committees. And as members are aware, we've got our next committee next Tuesday, and there are a number of applications already on that agenda. And the agenda for the end of July committee is also looking quite busy. So we want to keep you with plenty of things to do. The end of the paper sets out the applications that are currently under consideration, but we haven't yet targeted a committee date for them. And I would apologise, the very last application on the schedule, when we were copying information across, we took the information from the wrong application. This relates to private road number 3 on Collick Industrial Estate, and it's a new waste transfer station to replace Veolia's Free Street site, but we'll bring that proper information to you in due course. But I would apologise for that typographical error. Thank you, Chair. And as I said, if anyone's got comments, questions for us, we'll be very happy to answer them out of them. Oh, and one last thing I've got to ask members, if there are any applications that you would like to go on a site visit, please let us know and we will set things up.
Thank you, Mrs. Gill. And the typo is noted. So private road number 3, not number 4. Councillor Karima.
Yeah, just one. Pardon me, Chair. It's just a confirmation that every councillor finds out what's going on in their patch, but there's 1 or 2 crossovers. Like Councillor Nikki Brooks is still on it. So does Councillor Adams know about that? So they crossed over on here. I just wondered if the correct information has gone to the correct councillor, that's all. I can understand the crossover.
I think when after the elections, I did ask officers to have a look at where changes had come in terms of new members and stuff, and to reconsult on any applications they were dealing with, so that the new members were aware. Had the previous member been notified initially when the application came in? So we've gone through that process.
And if I may say, the schedule goes back to January, and certainly from January to April, 30th till the 5th of May, we did have a different council. So those previous councillors, where applications have been determined, it's appropriate that their names are still on the schedule. But we have, as Jonathan says, we have brought all our new councillors up to speed on things in their patch.
That's all, just that they were aware of it. I know there'd be some sort of crossover, but just seems a few of them. That's all. John Knights, Andy Wett and Nikki Brooks, various things, plus the new ones as well.
That's the joy or the perils of elections, isn't it? And changing faces. But yes, I think it has been allowed for, and it is noted how how new members' names are already in the reports, as well as our previous colleagues. And going back to what Mrs. Gill was saying about the amount of work that the department and indeed us as members are doing, it's certainly, yes, we've got quite a lot of items coming up in the future. I mentioned earlier on that the last meeting of this committee was way back in January. So we're certainly catching up now with the meeting next week, the extra meeting next week, and another one in July. It's partly as a result of the complexity of agreements, of applications take so long to work on and decide, and the number of them, the volume of them. I suspect as well that the, dare I say, the world of pandemic and way of working is probably having an effect on the length of time it's taking to get reports and papers ready for us. So don't be lulled into a sense of security that you will only be getting meetings every 6 or 7 months. Or no, it's more than that since January, isn't it? Oh no, where we are, yeah, 6 months since January. So the next meeting is next week. I think we've had a good meeting today. It's been, as I said earlier on, it's been a very, although there's one item on the agenda, or one planning application on the agenda, it's a very important, very high profile, meaning a lot of concern and interest to a lot of people. And I think we gave it the attention it deserved. And we have made a decision, and that's what we are here to do. So I think with that, we'll probably bring the meeting to a close. And thank you for your attendance and your patience, Councillor Owen, and your contributions. And we'll see you next week. Okay, thank you.